The graft had taken, and the human was still there. Graftwright Olaf Kesson stood over the cradle in Graft Hall 9 and read the room the way his people had read rooms for 900 generations, not with his weak, milk-blind eyes, but with the scent plumes rising off the slab and the low vibration climbing through the floor into the sensing membrane at his throat. By every certainty his lineage had ever handed down, the plume he should be tasting now was the flat, mineral nothing of a mind gone under. The quenching. The moment when the self let go, and the strength took the empty house. He tasted it, and it was not flat. It was bright, it was frightened, it was awake. "Read again," Olaf said. Tsivo bent over the resonance well, his young membrane still translucent at the edges, still soft enough to show what he felt. The junior graftwright's hands moved across the well and drew the plume up into the reading column, where it should have thinned to gray. It did not thin. It held its color, that specific, stubborn warmth Olaf had spent 40 years learning to associate with a thing that did not want to die. "The self-index is holding, graftwright." Tsivo's voice came out thin, pitched high in the register the young ones used when the world stopped agreeing with the manuals. "It should be falling. The draw line is fully seated. I can taste the strength in him. It's all there, every filament of it, the whole harvested weight of the beast. But the self hasn't gone." "I heard you read." Olaf kept his own hands flat on the rim of the cradle, steady, the way an old graftwright's hands were supposed to stay when a younger one was watching. Under the slate-gray skin of his palms, he could feel the human's pulse coming up through the metal, and it was wrong. It was not the slow, dull thud of a beast settling into new muscle. It was quick, and it was climbing, and it had a pattern to it, and patterns were what selves made. The strength of the draw was the most feared thing the Sail Dominion harvested. Olaf had built his whole life on that fear. He had taken the living power out of the war beasts of the deep worlds, the thing that let a draw fold a boarding hatch in half, the thing that let it walk through a suppression line and keep walking, and he had learned to seat that power into lesser bodies, servitor frames, penal conscripts, twice, in his younger years, into volunteers of the warrior caste, who had not survived their own new strength because the beast in the graft had eaten the small mind that carried it. That was the certainty. The strength came with the beast attached, and the beast always won, and so you only ever gave the strength to something you did not mind losing. They had given it to the human, because they had not minded losing him. "Warden Commandant Vosk wants the demonstration at second bell," Tsivo said. "He has already told the garrison it will obey sent command by then. He has told them it will heal." Then the Warden Commandant told them a thing that is not yet true. Olaf leaned closer to the slab. He let the milk-blind eyes go slack and read the human entirely through the plume and the heat shape of him. A compact, warm form, smaller than a V-harrow, far smaller than the servitor frames they usually loaded with a draw line, ridiculous really. A soft-skinned creature with no scales and no chitin and no natural weapon of any kind on it. And now the harvested strength of the most feared animal in 4 systems, seated into that soft frame, and the soft frame's mind still burning steady on top of it like a lamp that would not be told to gutter. The human opened his eyes. Olaf could not see the eyes well, color and fine shape were lost to him, but he felt the heat of the face change, the small muscles pulling, and he tasted the plume spike and then, astonishingly, level off. Steady. A creature waking into a body that had just been made many times stronger than it was born to be, and instead of thrashing, instead of the blind animal panic the certainty promised, it lay still and it took stock. Then it made a sound, not a beast sound, a word. "Where's Marta?" Tsivo flinched hard enough that his hands came off the well. It graftwright, it retained speech. It retained *specific speech. It is asking after another unit. "I heard it." Olaf had heard it. He had heard in the graft hall where he had unmade 100 minds and never once been surprised by what was left. A fresh grafted drawl carrier open its ruined mouth and ask, in a small and level voice, after someone it loved. The certainty in his lineage had a word for a mind that survived the graft. The word was *impossible*. They had brought the human up from the holding tier 11 days before, and Olith had not thought about him as anything at all, because that was how the work was done. The convoy had come out of the Red Line, the Dominion's word for the human sphere, the cluster of worlds around the Death World. The attrition index rated grade 9, the highest grade the record keepers kept a column for. Grade 9 meant an origin world that killed its own children as a matter of course and produced, from the survivors, an animal the Dominion had learned the hard way not to meet in the open. The humans in the Red Line were mostly haulers and salvage crews and hardscrabble colonists, and the Dominion took them the way it took anything that strayed near a garrison lane, quietly, in bulk, and without a great deal of paperwork. This lot had been a salvage convoy. 9 hulls, stripped and towed, the crews penned in the holding tier under the graft hall while the warden commandant decided what they were worth. Most would go to the labor moons. A few, the young and unbroken ones, would go where Olith's work sent them, which was to say, they would stop being people and start being frames. The warden commandant had come to the hall himself to choose. Vosk was reptilian, green-scaled, of the brute lineages that the Dominion bred for garrison command, because they did not flinch, and did not question, and did not, in the main, think past the next order. He had walked the holding line with his tail dragging a slow hiss across the deck and his throat sacs working, and he had stopped in front of a soft-skinned young male who had not lowered his eyes. "That one," Vosk had said. "It stares. Break the stare out of it. Put the draw line in it and give me a heavy that heals to scent. I have a labor moon full of these things about to decide it would rather die than dig, and I want to walk a monster of their own kind down the line so they remember what we can make of them." Olith had tasted the plume off the young human then, the way he tasted everything, and he had found it unremarkable. Fear, yes, the ordinary chemical fear of a caught animal, but underneath it something dense and level that he had not had a word for and had not bothered to find one. He had marked the human for the cradle and forgotten his face, because faces were nothing to Olith. He had never once needed a face to do his work. The human's designation on the intake plume was a string of Dominion cipher, but the human had a name for itself, and it had said it once flatly, when the intake clerk asked for a sound to log, and the clerk had logged the sound and moved on. The sound was *Alian*. "It is asking again," Tsivo said. Olith came back into the moment. The strength in the cradle had not moved, that was the discipline, or the fear, holding it flat on the slab where the restraints crossed it, but the plume was working, patient, asking, "Where's Marta? Is she alive?" Olith had never answered a frame before. There had never been anything in a frame to answer. He found himself leaning down toward the human's heat shape, and he found himself speaking, and the strangeness of it moved through him like cold water. "You should not be able to form that question," Olith said, "in the trade camp the Dominion used with its livestock. Do you understand what has been done to you?" The human was quiet for a moment. The plume shifted, not fear now, something more organized, something turning over. When it spoke again, it did not answer the question it had been asked. It asked its own. "You put something in me." Alian's voice was rough from the tube they'd had down him, but it was steady, and it did not shake the way Olith's certainty said a fresh grafted thing's voice must shake. "I can feel it. It's like there's a second set of hands, underneath mine." Wanting to close. A pause. The plume flared, then leveled, a deliberate act. Olith realized the creature was choosing to be calm. "I'm not going to let them close, not on Marta, not on any of us, so you can tell whoever's paying you that." Tsivo made a small sound in his throat. Olith straightened. His membrane had gone tight with a sensation he did not have a graftwright's word for, because graftwrights did not need a word for it. He had spent 40 years certain that strength was a solvent, that you could not pour the beast into a house without dissolving whoever lived there. He had built a reputation, a caste standing, a whole shape of a life on that certainty. and a soft-skinned animal from a grade 9 world was lying in his cradle with the whole harvested weight of a drawl seated in its marrow, telling him, in complete sentences, exactly what it would and would not permit that strength to do. "Second bell," Olith said to Tsivo, because it was the only true thing left to hold. "Prepare the demonstration hall, and do not," he stopped. "Do not tell the warden commandant that the mind held. Not yet. Graftwright, if I read false to the warden." "You will not read false. You will read *incomplete." Olith turned his blind face toward the young one and let the authority of 40 years sit in his plume. "There is a difference, and one day it may be the only room you have left to stand in. Learn it now." The demonstration hall at Sarin Reach was a wide, bright drum of a room, its high dome banded with the pale daylight of the garrison's white sun coming down through filter glass, and by second bell it was full. Vosk had made sure of that. He had walked the garrison's junior officers in, and a delegation of scale-cast quartermasters, and this was the part that mattered. The part Olith understood was the whole purpose of the exercise. A line of human prisoners from the holding tier, hobbled and roped, brought up to watch what the Dominion could make of one of their own. That was the message. Vosk did not want a weapon so much as he wanted a sermon. He wanted the caught humans to look at the monster he had built out of a boy they knew, and to understand that resistance did not end in death, which humans were famously willing to accept, but in transformation which they might not be. Olith stood at the graftwright station at the rim of the drum and tasted the crowd. The prisoner's plume came to him in a not fear, and under it that same dense level thing he had smelled on Elian and still had no word for, running through all of them like a shared root. And one plume in the knot was different, older, female, threaded through with a grief so controlled it read almost like calm. That one would be Marta. Vosk mounted the low dais at the center of the drum. He had a scent collar clipped at his throat, the standard handler's instrument, a little resonating cup that broadcast the command plumes a grafted heavy was conditioned to obey. He had never used one on a drawl carrier before. No one had. You did not condition the strength of the drawl. You pointed it and got out of the way. But Vosk had been promised a heavy that healed, and Vosk intended to heal it in front of an audience. "Bring it up," Vosk said. They brought Elian up through the floor on the cradle lift, and the drum went quiet. Olith felt the quiet as a change in the vibration through his membrane, 300 throats stopping their small movements at once. Even blind, he knew what they were seeing. A soft young human, unremarkable in every dimension, standing on the lift plate in a plain gray conditioning wrap, dirt still on him from the holding tier, a faint scratch across one cheekbone. Nothing about him large, nothing about him loud. The most ordinary possible object to hang the most feared strength in 4 systems inside of. And around the rim, the officers who knew what a drawl was, leaning back. "Human," Vosk said, and thumbed the scent collar. Olith tasted the command plume bloom across the drum. It was the first-tier handler's command, the one they used to bring a fresh heavy to its knees to establish the order of things. Kneel, and know your master. Every servitor frame Olith had ever built would have folded at that plume like a cut stalk. Elian did not kneel. He stood on the plate and he tipped his head, very slightly, the way a person does when they have heard a sound they are deciding whether to care about. And then Olith felt the drum's vibration shift again, the whole crowd inhaling. The human lifted one hand, looked at it, turned it over and closed it slowly into a fist and opened it again, as if testing a glove. "I felt that," Elian said, his voice carried in the bright drum flat and clear. "The smell, it wants me to get down." He lowered the hand. "No." Vosk's tail struck the dais once, a hard crack. He thumbed the collar to second tier. Olith tasted the plume sharpen, the *compliance or pain command, the one wired to the conditioning nodes they'd seated at the base of a heavy skull. On a servitor frame, it triggered a lance of engineered agony, that made obedience the only mercy. Elian's heat shape flickered. Olaf tasted the spike of real pain come off him, sharp and white. The human's jaw set. A tremor went through the compact frame. And the strength under his skin, the second set of hands Olaf had seated there, surged up hard enough that Olaf felt it as a pressure change in the room, a low subsonic groan through the floor that made two of the junior officers step back off their heels. This was the moment. This was where the beast came up through the pain and took the house. Olaf had seen it in the volunteers years ago, the mind drowning, the strength surfacing, the thing that had been a person becoming a weather system. He braced his membrane for it. It did not come. Elian stood in the pain with the beast roaring up under his skin, and he closed his eyes, and he did not let it close his hands. Olaf tasted the war of it, the strength straining toward violence, the mind holding it back by main force, and he tasted the mind win asterisk. The subsonic groan faded. The human opened his eyes. "You can keep doing that," Elian said to Vosk, and his voice shook now, but only from the pain, not from anything giving way. "It hurts. I'm not going to lie about that, but if you're trying to make me into the thing you're afraid of, you should know it doesn't work the way you think. The scary part was never the muscle." He drew a breath. "It was always whoever's driving." Vosk stared at the human. Then he turned his green-scaled head toward the graftwright station, toward Olaf, and his plume came across the drum thick with a rage that had fear underneath it, the specific fear of a garrison brute who has just been made small in front of his officers. "Graftwright," Vosk said, "you will explain to me why my monster is talking." Olaf had spent his life not being afraid in front of the brute lineages, because a graftwright who showed fear did not keep his hall. So he crossed the drum with his slow, even step, and he stood before Vosk's rage and let it break over his membrane, and he told the warden commandant a careful, incomplete truth. "The draw line seated cleanly," Olaf said. "The strength is entire. You have, standing there, the full harvested power of a war beast, more than any servitor frame has ever carried and kept its feet. That part of the commission is complete." He let that sit, because it was true, and because Vosk needed a true thing to hold. The obedience seating is incomplete. The host's mind proved unusually resistant to the conditioning plume. I will require more time in the cradle to bring it down. "More time?" Vosk's throat sacs pulsed. "You told me 11 days. You told me the beast eats the mind. Every graftwright I have ever paid has told me the beast eats the mind." "And it does," Olaf said, "in every frame I have ever built." He did not say, "until this one." He did not say the word his lineage kept for the thing on the lift plate. He stood in the room he had told Sivo to learn, the narrow room between reading false and reading incomplete. And he watched, through his membrane, the human watching him. Because Elian was watching him. Olaf could feel the heat of the young face turned his way, and the plume off it had changed again, and this new note in it was the one that would keep Olaf awake in the cycles to come. It was not fear, and it was not hate. It was asterisk attention asterisk. The human had understood in the space of that exchange that the blind gray creature at the graftwright station had just chosen not to sell him to the reptile. And the human was filing that away, the way a person files away a debt or a door. "Take it back to the cradle," Vosk said at last. His plume had cooled to something colder and worse than rage, the flat, patient malice of a garrison officer who has decided to be embarrassed no longer. "You have 3 more days, graftwright. If it does not heal by then, I will stop wasting the draw line on a soft frame, and I will render it down and start again with the next one on the holding line." He turned his scaled head toward the roped humans at the drum's edge, and let his plume roll over them so they would taste the promise in it. "There is no shortage of the next one." The prisoner's knot of plume tightened. And out of it, clear and controlled, came the older female's Marta's, and Olaf tasted her find Elian across the drum, tasted the grief in her lift into something fierce and wordless. A mother sent, though Olaf did not know if she was his mother, a plume that said, I see you, hold on." Elian turned his head toward it, just for a moment, and Olaf, standing between the two of them, tasted the thing pass between the human and the human, the thing his people had no gland to make and no membrane to read, and understood only that it was strong, and that it was the reason the beast had not won. They took Elian down through the floor, the drum emptied, and Olaf Kesson stood a long time in the fading daylight coming through the dome, tasting the empty air where the impossible thing had been, and knowing that in 3 days the warden commandant would either own a monster or render a boy, and that he, Olaf, was the one who would have to decide which. Tsivo found him in the specimen tier that night, among the harvest vats where the raw draw lines were kept suspended, taken from the deep-world beasts and held in the cold against the next commission. It was where Olaf went when a certainty cracked. The vats hummed a low, even note through the floor, and the plume down there was clean and mineral and old, and it usually settled him. It did not settle him tonight. "You didn't tell him," Tsivo said. The young graftwright's plume was a tangle. You had the truth and you gave him a shape of the truth. Graftwright, if he learns the mind held from the start, if he learns we knew. He will not learn it from you. No, no, of course not. Tsivo came closer into the hum of the vats, his soft membrane catching the cold. But I don't understand what we're doing, what we are asterisk for if not this. You taught me the first certainty yourself on my first cycle in the hall. The strength dissolves the self. It is the oldest thing we know. It is why the work is bearable. His plume dropped. It is why I could load a frame and not think of it as a person. Because by the time the strength was in, the person was gone. That was the mercy of it. The person was already gone. Olaf stood very still in the cold. That was the thing. That was the whole load-bearing lie of his life's work, spoken back to him in his student's frightened voice. By the time the strength was in, the person was gone. It was how a graftwright slept. It was how you took a young volunteer of the warrior caste, full of pride and a future, and poured a beast into him, and told yourself the pride and the future were extinguished by the pouring so that what thrashed and died on the slab afterward was only meat and appetite, only the beast, never the boy. Olaf had believed it because he had needed to believe it, and he had been very good all his life at needing to believe it. And now a soft-skinned animal from a grade 9 world had lain in his cradle and refused to disappear. "Tsivo," Olaf said, "every frame we have ever built, every volunteer, every conscript." He turned his blind face toward the harvest vats, toward the cold, suspended strength of 100 dead beasts. What if the person was not always gone? Tsivo went silent. What if the strength never dissolved the self at all? Olaf said slowly, as if setting each word down on a slab to examine it. What if it only overwhelmed it? What if in every frame we ever loaded, the self was in there, underneath the beast, drowning, not dissolved, drowning, and the only difference with this human is that this one is strong enough in the self to keep its head above the water. Strong in the place we never learned to measure, because we came from a world that did not require it, and it came from a world that required nothing else. The vats hummed. Tsivo's plume had gone the pale, scentless color of a young V-harrow staring at a thing he could not put back in its box. "Then all of them," Tsivo whispered, "every one of them we ever—" "I know what I am saying," Olaf said, and for the first time in 40 years his own hands were not steady. Elian sat in the cradle hold in the dark he did not need. The V-harrow kept no lights, having no use for them, and the humans in the holding tiers had learned to live in it, and took inventory of himself the way his grandfather had taught him to inventory a salvage hull before you trusted your weight to it. Panel by panel. What holds, what's cracked, what'll kill you if you lean on it wrong. His hands held. That surprised him. He flexed them in the dark and felt the second strength come up under the motion, smooth and enormous, a thing that wanted to keep going past where he stopped it, like a door with too much weight behind it. In the demonstration drum he had closed his fist to test it and had felt in the closing that he could have folded the restraint bar across his chest like wet cardboard. He had not folded it. He had made himself not fold it. That was the crack he was watching, not the strength, the wanting. Because it did want. That was the part he would never be able to explain to Marta if he ever got the chance. The strength they'd put in him wasn't just muscle. It came with an asterisk pull, a low, constant, patient suggestion, running under everything, that closing was easy and opening was hard, that the fastest way through any problem was to reach out and break it. When Vosk had lit up the pain node at the base of his skull, the pull had surged into a roar, and for one white instant Elian had understood exactly how a person could let go, could just stop holding the door and let the weight take it, and never have to feel anything again except the simple, total relief of breaking whatever was in front of him. He had thought about Marta's face. He had thought about the boy, Denny, who was 9 and cried at night in the holding tier, and whom Elian had taught to play a clapping game to have something to do with the fear. He had thought about the fact that if he let the door go, the next thing the weight would reach for would be the roped-up people at the edge of the drum, because that was the nearest thing to break, and the pull did not care whose people they were. So he had held the door. He would keep holding it. He knew that the way he knew his own name. What he did not know was how long a person could hold a door with a war beast leaning on the other side, and what would be left of the person when his arms finally gave. There was a change in the dark, a shift in the air, a faint mineral smell, a presence. Elian had learned in 11 days that the gray blind ones moved almost silently, and that you smelled them before anything else, a cold, clean, chemical scent, like the inside of a machine. "You are awake," the old one said, the graftwright, the one who had stood between him and the reptile and lied carefully to save him 3 days. "Your kind requires more rest than this." "My kind requires a lot of things it isn't getting." Elian didn't move. "You're the one who did this to me." "Yes." "Why'd you cover for me, up there?" The old alien was quiet. Elian could hear it breathing, or doing whatever it did instead of breathing, a faint working in its throat. When it spoke again, its trade cant was slow, and Elian had the strange sense that it was choosing words in a language it did not usually bother to be careful in. "Because I have built 91 frames," the graftwright said. "And I have told myself 91 times that the thing on my slab was already gone before I finished it. And then I put the strength into you, and you asked after Marta." A pause. "And I am no longer certain that the other 91 were gone. I am a very old creature to lose a certainty, human. It does not sit well." Elian sat with that in the dark. He had spent his whole life around hard people. Salvage crews were hard. The Red Line was hard. You did not survive a grade 9 origin by being soft, and he had learned to hear the difference between a person making an excuse and a person confessing something that cost them. This was the second kind. "What's your name?" Elian said. The graftwright's plume did something Elian couldn't read. "Olith." "Elian." He held up a hand in the dark, the human gesture absurd here, and let it drop. "Okay, Olith, here's where we are. You put a monster in me. In 3 days your reptile wants the monster to heal, or he melts me down and does it to somebody else off that line. Denny's on that line. He's 9. Elian's voice didn't rise. He'd learned that too, that the quietest voice in the room was usually the one that had already decided something. "So I don't think heal is on the table. And I don't think you melting down a 9-year-old is either, which means you and me have a problem to solve and not a lot of time, and you're the only one in this whole rock who knows what I actually am now." He turned his head toward the cold mineral scent. "So, what am I, Olith? What did you make?" The old graftwright was silent for a long moment in the dark. "I do not know," Olith said. "That is the truest thing I have said in 40 years. I do not know what you are. I built you to be a weapon that could not choose, and you are a weapon that will not stop choosing." The plume shifted closer. "I have spent my life afraid of the strength. I think, human, that I have been afraid of the wrong thing." The inspector came at first light, and Olith knew the program had stopped being a garrison matter the moment he tasted her plume come down the landing lane. Overseer Sethun Vry was of the record-keeping caste, not scale-brute like Vosk, not gray-blind like Olith, but one of the tall, pale, narrow lineages the Dominion used to audit its own machinery, with a plume that arrived cold and organized and gave nothing away. She traveled with 2 aides and a portable ledgerary, and the quiet, total authority of someone who could close a garrison with a mark. Vosk met her at the landing with his throat sacs held carefully still, and Olith understood, watching the 2 plumes negotiate their heights, that the warden commandant was afraid of her, and that this was going to make everything worse. The Drawl Carrier program is flagged for review at the Ascendant tier, Vry said, without preamble, in the clean chamber Vosk had cleared for her. Olith stood at the graftwright's distance, hands folded, reading. A garrison commandant does not requisition a draw line without the Reach hearing of it. The Reach wishes to know whether you have produced a controllable heavy or wasted a strategic asset on a soft frame. Her plume turned toward Olith, precise as a blade laid flat. You are the graftwright of record. Report. Olith had rehearsed this in the specimen tier through the night hours. He gave her the true things, arranged in the order that bought the most time. The draw line is fully seated. The host carries the complete strength. In load-bearing terms, the graft is the most successful I have performed. The frame is smaller than any prior carrier and shows no structural rejection. All true. The obedience conditioning is proving slow. The host's central resistance is anomalous. Anomalous how? The self did not quench. The words were out before Olith had decided to spend them, and he tasted Sivo at the edge of the room go rigid. But Vry was a record keeper, and record keepers were dangerous precisely because they could not be lied to for long. The incomplete truth that held a brute like Vosk would only sharpen a mind like hers. Olith had judged in the night that his one thin chance of steering this was to be the creature in the room who understood the anomaly best, and that he could not be that creature while pretending it did not exist. Explain, Vry said, and her aide styluses moved across the ledgerary. In every prior carrier, the host mind is overwhelmed by the seated strength within the first day, Olith said. We have always called this dissolution. I now believe it is not dissolution but suppression. The self survives, submerged, and drowns. This host does not drown. Its self-index has held steady through full seeding and through second-tier conditioning plume. It retains identity, memory, speech, and volition. It refuses command not because the conditioning failed to reach it, but because it reaches the conditioning back. It feels the command, understands the command, and declines. The chamber was very quiet. Vosk's plume had gone thick and unhappy. This was not the story he had wanted told to the Reach. You are describing, Vry said slowly, a draw strength heavy that is also a reasoning agent with intact will. Yes. That is not a weapon, graftwright. That is a soldier. A pause, and for the first time something moved under the record-keeper's cold plume. Not fear, not yet, but the first cold edge of a very large idea arriving. One does not point a soldier. One convinces a soldier, and this one is not of the Dominion. Her narrow head turned toward Vosk. You have manufactured, at ascendant expense, a being with the strength of our most feared war beast and the loyalties of a grade 9 death world. And you propose to walk it down a line of its own kind to break their morale. It will heal, Vosk said. The graftwright needs. It will not heal. Vry's plume cut him off flat. The graftwright has just told you it will not heal in the most careful language I have ever heard a gray caste use, which means it is worse than he is saying. Her attention came back to Olith, and now there was weight in it, the whole apparatus of the Reach behind it. I want to see it, not a demonstration, a test I design. Bring it to the beast hold at midday. The beast hold was where they kept the living draw. Olith had not wanted Elian to know what was in there. But the human knew the moment they walked him in, because some things do not need eyes. The hold was a deep drum sunk under the garrison, daylight coming down grudging through armored filter shafts, and at the bottom of it, behind a suppression lattice that hummed hard enough to hurt Olith's membrane, was the animal his whole cast built its work around. The drawl was the size of a cargo lifter. It was scaled and plated and low, and it moved along the lattice with a terrible economy, no wasted motion anywhere in it, and its plume came off it so thick and so wrong that even Elian, blunt-nosed and human, went pale and still. This was the thing Olith harvested. This was the strength he had poured into 91 frames, and now, into one soft young male who stood at the rail of the hold and looked down at the source of the second set of hands living under his skin. "That's what's in me," Elian said. It was not a question. "A rendering of it," Olith said quietly. "The strength, not the mind. We do not take the mind. The mind is what makes it." He stopped. "A monster," Elian's voice was flat. "You take the strong part and leave the wanting to break part, and you figure that's the whole animal." He watched the drawl pace. "It's not, though, is it? It's scared. Look at it. It paces because it's scared and it's got nowhere to put it, so it puts it into breaking things. That's not a monster. That's just something in a cage with feelings it can't hold." Olith had rendered strength out of 40 living drawl across his career, and no one had ever, in his hearing, described one as *scared*. Overseer VRY stood at the rail with her ledger aids, and she had designed a test, and it was a cruel and elegant one. "The suppression lattice will lower for a count of 30, she said. "The animal will be free within the hold. The host will be on the floor of the hold with it. We will observe whether the seated strength recognizes its own source, whether, in the presence of the living drawl, the beast line in the host answers the beast and takes the host with it." She turned her cold plume on Olith. "If your theory is correct and the self holds even at the source, we will know we have made something new. If the host drops the moment the beast is loose, we will know it was only ever a slow dissolution, and the warden commandant may proceed with his sermon." "Overseer," Olith said, "that will kill him. Theory or not, a loose drawl in a closed hold, no frame survives a drawl in the open. That is the entire." "Then we will have our answer cheaply," VRY said, "and lost only a soft frame we were prepared to render regardless." She did not raise her plume. She did not need to. "Put it on the floor, graftwright, or I will note in the record that you obstructed an ascendant-tier review, and the Reach will send someone who will put it on the floor and render *you for the interference." Olith stood at the rail. He tasted Sivo behind him, frozen. He tasted Vosk, pleased now, the malice in him warming at the prospect. He tasted the cage drawl and its fear that read as fury. And he tasted Elian, beside him, going very still and very level in the way Olith had learned, meant the human had finished being afraid and started deciding. "Don't," Elian said low, so only Olith could take it. "Don't argue yourself onto that floor with me. She'll do it. I can hear it in her. I don't need to smell it." He put a hand briefly on the rail and the metal groaned under it before he eased off. "Just tell me one thing, the animal down there. If I don't want to kill it, can I not?" Olith turned his blind face on the human. "It will try to kill you," Olith said. "I heard the question I asked." "The strength in you knows the strength in it," Olith said slowly. "They are the same line. It is possible, I do not know, no one has ever, it is possible the beast will not read you as prey. It may read you as kin. That will not make it safe. A frightened thing that thinks you are kin is still a frightened thing with the strength to fold a hull." A pause. "But no, to answer what you asked, you do not have to kill it. Whether you can keep from it at the source with the pull that strong, that I cannot promise. No one can." Elian nodded once. Then he swung his leg over the rail and dropped 12 feet to the floor of the beast hold, landing without a sound the human frame should not have been able to make, and he straightened, and he stood alone on the floor with the most feared animal in 4 systems, and he lifted his empty hands to show them to it. "Lower the lattice," VRY said. Olith would remember what he tasted next for the rest of his life, and he would never once be able to render it into a report. The suppression lattice powered down, and the drawl was free, and it came off the far wall in a single motion that crossed half the hold before Olith's membrane had finished registering that it had moved. It came at Elian the way an avalanche comes at a valley, without malice, without deliberation, the pure momentum of a thing that broke whatever stood where it was going. And Elian did not run, because there was nowhere to run, and did not brace to fight, which would have been suicide, and did not, Olith realized, do any of the things a mind does when it decides to survive. He did the thing a mind does when it decides to reach something. Elian stood in the path of the avalanche, and he did not close his hands. He opened them, and the strength Olith had seated in him, the second set of hands that wanted always to close, the human turned it, somehow in the last half-second, from a fist into a *catch*. The drawl hit him. The sound came up through the floor and into Olith's membrane like a struck bell. The human went back a full body length across the floor of the hold, heels gouging the deck, but he did not go down, and he did not break, and when the noise settled, Olith tasted the impossible arrangement of it. The young human standing with his boots dug into the deck, and his open hands planted against the plated skull of a beast the size of a cargo lifter, holding it, not striking it, holding it the way you hold a door with too much weight behind it, the strength in his arms answering the strength in the animal exactly, matched line to line, the same harvested power on both sides of the contact canceling to a trembling, screaming stillness. And Elian was talking to it. Olith could not hear the words over the groan of the strain, but he could taste the plume of it, low, steady, level, the same plume the human had put out in the dark of the cradle hold, the choosing to be calm * plume, aimed now at a panicking war beast the way a person aims a low voice at a spooked animal in a stall. Easy, easy. I'm not going to hurt you. I know, easy. The drawl screamed and shoved, and the human's boots plowed the deck and held. The drawl reared and struck down, and the human turned it aside, not away from himself, away from the hold wall *. So the blow that would have caved a person's chest went instead into empty air, and Olith understood that Elian was not only surviving the beast, he was * managing * it, reading its panic and bleeding it off, refusing every opening to end it, choosing over and over in half-second increments not to bring the war strength down on a frightened animal that shared his blood. It took a long time. It felt like a long time. And slowly Olith tasted it happen, tasted the beast's fury plume thin and change. The drawl stopped fighting. It stopped because the thing it was hitting would not hit back and would not fall and would not stop making the low, steady sound. And somewhere in the old wet machinery of the animal's brain a circuit that had not fired since it was taken from its deep world fired now. This one is not the enemy. This one is holding me and not hurting me. This one is kin. The drawl sagged. Its enormous plated head came down, and it leaned. Olith would swear to the end of his days that it leaned into the human's open hands, and Elian took the weight of it, staggering, and stood there in the middle of the beast hold, holding up the head of the animal. His whole caste had spent 1,000 years learning only how to kill, murmuring to it, while a war beast that had never in recorded history been touched by a living hand, and not died for it, breath slow and heavy, against a 19-year-old salvage hauler from a grade 9 world. Raise the lattice, Overseer VRY said. Her voice had changed. Olith tasted it. The cold organization of her plume had a crack in it now, fine as a hair, the first crack. Raise it slowly. Do not startle them. Them. Even the record keeper had said * them. They brought Elian up out of the beast hold, and he was shaking. Olith tasted the aftershock coming off him in waves, the body dumping the load it had carried, the hands that had held a drawl now barely able to hold the rail. But he came up under his own power, and the first thing he did on the deck was turn toward the beast hold rail and look back down at the animal, which had returned to pacing but slower now, easier, its fury plume gone quiet, and something in the set of the human's shoulders said he was sorry to leave it there. You held the source, Olith said. He kept his plume low, private between the two of them. No frame has ever held the source. No frame has ever wanted to. It wasn't hard to want. Elian scrubbed the sweat off his face with a forearm. It was hard to hold. Those are different. He looked at Olith with his blunt human eyes that Olith could barely see. It's still down there in a cage, Olith. I held it and I couldn't do anything for it except not hurt it. That's not enough. That never feels like enough. Olith had no answer his caste had ever taught him for that. Overseer VRY did. She had watched the whole of it from the rail, and her record-keeper's mind had been working the entire time, and when she spoke now, her cold plume had reorganized itself around the enormous new idea and locked it into place, and Olith understood at once that they had traded one danger for a larger one. Graftwright. VRY did not look at Elian, she looked at Olith because Olith was the asset that mattered now, not the host but the method asterisk. You said this host's resistance is anomalous, that it comes from the strength of itself, a strength native to its origin world which the beast line cannot dissolve. Is that quality transferable? If you selected hosts from the same origin, the same death world stock, the same self-strength, could you seat the draw line and reliably produce this? A reasoning heavy that carries war beast's strength and does not dissolve. Olith felt the floor of his whole life shift under the question. You are asking, he said, whether I can make more of him. I am asking whether the Dominion can field a cast of them. Virai's plume was very steady now, very sure, the record-keeper who has found the line item that justifies the whole ledger. A garrison commandant wanted a heavy to frighten laborers. He thought too small. What you have made on this floor is a soldier with the strength of a draw and a will that cannot be commanded by an enemy, which means it also cannot be commanded by us asterisk, which is a problem, but problems of loyalty are solved by other means than the graft. We do not need to make them obey the plume. We need only make them ours, take them young enough, raise them in the Dominion, give them cause. A generation of draw-strength soldiers who reason, who adapt, who hold the source without dissolving. Her narrow head tilted. The Reach has spent 400 years afraid of what a grade 9 world produces. You have shown me how to asterisk harvest asterisk it. Olith stood in the bright grudging daylight of the beast-hold gantry, and he tasted his own future arrive, and it was worse than any certainty he had ever lost. Because she was not wrong, that was the horror of it. He was the best graftwright in the Reach, and he had just watched his own method succeed past every parameter, and he could see, see asterisk in the cold, clean architecture of his caste mind, exactly how it would be done. Select for the self-strength. Take the young. Seat the line. Raise the results in Dominion halls with Dominion loyalties and Dominion cause, so that the will that could not be commanded by an enemy would simply never asterisk no asterisk it was a captive. Build 1,000 Elians who had never met a Marta, who had no red line to hold the door for, who would pour the strength of the draw wherever the Reach pointed, because the Reach was the only home they had ever been given. He could build that. He, Olith Kesson, could build the thing that would end the one advantage a grade 9 world had ever held, the fact that its strength came bundled with a self that would not serve. I will need the host cooperative, VRY said, to study the method, keep it alive and intact. The warden commandant's sermon is cancelled. The asset is far too valuable to walk down a labor line. It goes with me to the Reach when I depart in 6 days, and the graftwright of record goes with it. She was already turning, already moving, the decision made and filed. 6 days, graftwright, prepare your notes. You have just become the most important gray caste alive. She left, her aides followed. And Olith stood on the gantry with Elian, who had understood every word of the trade cant, and who was looking at the graftwright now with an expression Olith could not see but could taste, the plume of a young man who has just heard, in complete and reasonable sentences, a plan to do to 1,000 children what had been done to him, and to make sure none of them ever grew up with a Marta to hold the door for. So that's it, Elian said quietly. I held the beast and I didn't kill it, and I thought maybe that'd show her something, and what it showed her was how to make a factory. He laughed once with no humor in it. God, I made it worse just by being what I am. No, Olith said. You heard her, Olith. I heard her. Olith turned his blind face on the young human, and something in him that had been 40 years hardening cracked cleanly through. I heard her describe a thing only I can build, which means I heard her describe a thing that does not exist unless I build it. He was quiet a moment. You asked me in the dark what you were. I told you I did not know. I know one thing now. You are the last proof I will ever have that the person was never gone. And I am not going to spend it teaching the Reach how to make a person who is. Warden Commandant Vosk had been humiliated twice in 3 days, and a garrison brute does not carry humiliation the way a record keeper carries a ledger. He carries it the way a struck animal carries a wound, as a thing that must be answered on something soon, so that the pack sees him whole again. He could not answer it on the overseer. He could not answer it on the graftwright, who VRY had just made untouchable. He could not answer it on the human, who was now an ascendant-tier asset he was forbidden to damage. So Vosk went down to the holding tier to answer it on the ones who were still his. Tsivo saw it happen, and it was Tsivo who ran to find Olith, his young membrane blown wide with a horror he had no training to hold. The warden commandant, he got out. He has taken a work detail down to the holding tier. He has told the humans that since their monster will not perform, they will perform in its place. He is going to run the labor moon sorting early here in the drum, and he means to make an example of the old female, Marta. He knows the host cares for her. He said, Tsivo's plume broke. He said if he cannot walk their monster down the line, he will walk the line down in front of their monster and let it watch and learn what its refusal costs. Olith was already moving. He was old and gray and blind, and he had never in his life moved fast, and he moved fast now down through the specimen tier, past the harvest vats, toward the holding drum with Tsivo scrambling behind him. He did not have a plan. He had 40 years of standing carefully still while other creatures did terrible things at his elbow, and he had all at once run out of the ability to stand still. But he was old, and the garrison was large, and the human got there first. Because someone had told Elian. Olith would never learn who, one of the scale-cast techs who had watched the beast hold and been changed by it, maybe, or maybe Elian, had simply tasted the wrongness in the garrison's vibration the way he was learning to taste everything now. However, he knew, when Olith reached the mouth of the holding drum, the human was already inside it, already between the warden commandant's work detail and the roped line of his own people, and the whole vast bright drum had gone into the particular silence that Olith's people had a word for, the silence of a room that has just understood it is about to see something it will have to carry forever. Olith stopped at the drum's mouth, and he made himself read and not look away, because he was the graftwright of record, and whatever happened here, he had built the thing at the center of it, and the least he could do was witness it whole. The warden commandant stood at the center of the drum with his work detail fan behind him, 8 garrison enforcers of the scale-cast, shock pikes grounded, and a sorting block wheeled up on a grav sled, the ugly squared machine they used on the labor moons to process a line of bodies fast. Marta had been cut out of the roped line and stood alone before the block, small and gray-haired and utterly composed. Her human plume so controlled it read almost like the mineral calm of a V-harrow, and Olith understood that she had already decided to die well so that the others would remember it and be able to bear it. And between Marta and the block stood Elian, with his empty open hands at his sides. Move, Vosk said. No, Elian said. It was the same word he'd given the scent caller in the demonstration drum, the same flat, unhurried refusal from the same unremarkable young human. But the drum was different now, because everyone in it had heard what had happened in the beast hold, and the enforcers behind Vosk were not leaning back on their heels in bored certainty. They were watching the soft-skinned thing between their commandant and the block the way you watch a fault line, and their shock pikes were not quite grounded anymore. "You are an ascendant asset," Vosk said, and his plume was thick with the wound he'd come here to answer. "You are forbidden to be damaged. I know this. The overseer made it very clear." His throat sacs pulsed. "But these," he swung his scaled head at the roped line, "are not assets. These are stock, and you cannot be everywhere in this drum at once, monster. You can stand in front of the old female, or you can stand in front of the next one or the next. You cannot stand in front of all of them. So you will watch me process this line, one at a time, until you understand that your refusal in the beast hall bought these creatures nothing but a slower death. That is the lesson. That is what your will is worth here." He gestured, and two enforcers moved to pull the next human out of the line, a man then, and passed him the small shape that Olaf's membrane found and held. A very small heat shape, a child, 9 years old, who had learned a clapping game in the dark to have something to do with the fear. "Denny." Olaf tasted the exact moment Elian located the child in the line. He tasted the human's level, choosing plume waver, just once, just for a half-second, the door shuddering on its hinges. And then he tasted it come back, harder and colder and more deliberate than before, and he understood that the warden commandant had just made the single worst decision of his life, and did not yet know it. Because Vosk was right about one thing, Elian could not stand in front of all of them. So Elian decided to stop standing in front of anything, and to stand in front of the asterisk cause instead. He crossed the drum. He did not run, Olaf would remember that, would put it in no report but would carry it always. He did not run, did not roar, did not do a single thing the beast in him wanted. He walked, at an ordinary human pace, across the open floor of the drum toward the warden commandant, with his hands open and low, and the 8 enforcers brought their shock pikes up and leveled them, and Vosk hissed an order, and the drum filled with the crackle of a suppression line lighting up, the same weapons-grade discharge that dropped a rioting labor moon, 8 pikes of it, aimed at one soft young human walking slowly across a bright room. They fired. Olaf's membrane whited out with the shock of it, the drum's vibration spiking into a scream. When it cleared, the human was still walking. He had his forearms up across his face, and the conditioning wrap was scorched black off them, and the pain plume coming off him was a white sheet. Olaf had never tasted a living thing hold that much pain and keep its feet, let alone keep asterisk walking, and the strength under his skin had come up, all of it, the full harvested weight of the drawl, and Olaf could feel it in the floor, that subsonic groan, the beast surging up through the pain and howling to be let out to close. To break the 8 things hurting them. And Elian held the door. That was the thing Olaf finally, fully understood, standing at the mouth of the drum with his old blind face turned toward the impossible. The human was not walking through the suppression line because the strength made him invulnerable. It didn't. It hurt him. He was being burned and beaten, and it was costing him something Olaf could taste bleeding off him in sheets. He was walking through it because he had decided, with the small measurable strength of his self that his caste had never learned to weigh, that 8 enforcers hurting asterisk him was a price he would pay all day long before he let the weight in his arms come down on a single living body in this drum, even theirs, even the ones firing. He reached Vosk. The warden commandant, to his credit or his doom, did not run. He drew the garrison sidearm at his hip, a heavy scale-cast piece that could open a hull, and he put it against the human's scorched chest and fired it, point-blank, into the thing he had built. The drum shook, Elian staggered, and did not fall. He stood in front of the warden commandant with a wound in him that should have ended anything alive, the war beast's strength pouring itself into holding his own body together, and he reached out with one open, burned hand, not a fist. Olaf tasted it, never a fist, and he closed it gently, impossibly gently, around the barrel of the weapon, and he folded it. The metal that could open a hull crumpled in the human's fingers like wet paper, and the weapon died, and Elian let it drop, and he still did not raise the hand against the reptile who had fired it. "You keep asking it to be a monster," Elian said. His voice was wrecked and quiet, and it carried in the frozen drum to every roped human and every scale-cast enforcer, and to Olaf at the door. "You put a monster's strength in me, and you keep trying every way you know to make the rest of me match it. The pain, the plume, this." He nudged the crumpled weapon with his boot. "And I keep telling you, the strength was never the scary part." He drew a breath that Olaf could hear tearing on the way in. "I'm the scary part, me. The part you can't put a leash on because it's not muscle. And I've decided what I'm going to do with all this strength you gave me, Warden. Do you want to know?" Vosk did not answer. His plume had gone the color of a garrison brute who has finally, fully understood the size of his mistake, one heartbeat too late to matter. "I'm going to use it to make you stop," Elian said. "That's all, not to kill you, not to pay you back. Just stop." And he lifted the burned hand and set it, open flat, against the Warden Commandant's scaled chest, and he did not strike. He pushed. A single, measured, contemptuous push. The strength dialed down to almost nothing, the smallest fraction of what he'd used to hold a drawl, and it was still enough to lift 400 pounds of scale-cast Commandant off his feet and set him down on his back in the middle of his own drum, hard and empty of breath, and finished. Then Elian turned and looked at the 8 enforcers with their shock pikes still half raised, and Olaf tasted the whole drum hold its breath. And the human said, in the wrecked, level voice of someone who has already paid for the right to be obeyed, "Put them down, I'm not going to hurt you. But this is over." They put them down. For a moment the drum held that impossible balance, 8 armed enforcers standing down, a commandant flat on his back, 60 roped humans, and one burned young man swaying on his feet at the center of all of it. And Olaf understood that the balance would hold only as long as no one moved wrong. Marta moved right. She stepped out from before the sorting block, and she crossed to Elian, and she got a shoulder under his arm before his legs finished failing, and she took his weight the way he had taken the drawls, and she said something to him too low for even Olaf's membrane, and Olaf tasted the boy's plume answer it, relief and grief, and the particular exhausted human thing that Olaf's caste had no gland for and was beginning, against 40 years of training, to envy. "He's burned through," Marta said, loud, to the drum, to the enforcers, to Olaf at the door in the trade camp, so all of them would understand her. "Whatever you gave him, it's holding his body together right now instead of doing what you built it for. So if any of you are thinking this is your moment, think about what he did on his feet and understand what he could do if he stopped caring about keeping his hands open." She looked around the drum with her gray-haired human calm. "He's not going to hurt you, but I might not be able to say the same for what's in him if he goes down. So, nobody does anything stupid and everybody gets to keep breathing. Yes." The enforcers looked at their commandant on the floor. Vosk was breathing, Olaf could taste it, but he was not getting up, and something more than the wind had gone out of him. The plume of a pack brute whose pack had just watched him fail was not a plume that gave orders again soon. "Yes," said the ranking enforcer at last, and lowered his pike the rest of the way. Olaf crossed the drum then. He was aware of every eye and every plume tracking the graftwright of record as he came, the gray creature who had built the thing at the center of all this, and he did not care. He reached Elian, and he tasted the damage, and it was very bad. "You should be dead," Olaf said quietly, "twice over, the suppression line, the sidearm at contact range. There is nothing in the human frame that survives that." "There's not," Elian agreed. His voice was almost gone. "But you didn't build me a human frame anymore, did you?" A ghost of something crossed his ruined face. "You built me something that holds, so I held." Olaf put his gray hands on the human, reading the wound through his palms and his plume, and what he found was the strength doing exactly what the human had said. The whole harvested weight of the drawl turned inward, holding torn things together, keeping a body alive that had no business being alive, at a cost that was draining the boy toward a different kind of ending. The graft was saving him. The graft was also burning him down to do it. "You cannot keep this up," Olaf said. "The strength holding you together, it is spending you. You need to let the body do its own healing, and it cannot while the graft is carrying the load. You have to let go of some of the strength. Do you understand? The thing you have been holding closed all this time, some of it you have to let out, or it will hold you closed right into the ground." Elian's plume flickered with a tired, human amusement. "So now you want me to let the monster loose?" "Now I want you to live," Olaf said, and was surprised to find that he meant it entirely. Tsivo had come into the drum behind him, and the young graftwright's plume was doing something Olaf had never tasted off him. Not fear, not the pale scentlessness of a certainty lost, but something with an edge to it, something that had decided. He came to Olaf's side, and he looked at the burned human and at the 60 roped prisoners and at the commandant on the floor, and he said, "Lo, Graftwright, when the overseer comes back and sees this, she is not going to be frightened. You know that. She is going to be delighted, a heavy that walked through a suppression line and a point-blank sidearm and put a scale-cast commandant down with one open hand and then chose not to kill anyone. That is not a problem to her. That is the whole demonstration she came to see. That is the ledger closing." His membrane tightened. "She is going to want 1,000 of him more than ever now. And you and I are the ones she is going to make build them." Olaf stood with his hands on the dying and not dying human, and knew that the young one was exactly right. The drum was won, the war was not. Overseer VRY returned to the holding drum within the hour, and Tsivo had read her precisely. She came in with her 2 aides and her portable ledger array, and she took in the scene, the deposed commandant now sitting against the sorting block with his enforcers arranged around him in the loose, uncertain formation of a pack without a head. The 60 humans unroped now and gathered close. The burned young man propped against a support strut with the old female beside him and the graftwright at his side, and her cold record-keeper's plume did not spike with alarm. It sharpened with interest. "Report," she said to Olaf, as if the drum were an experiment that had merely produced an unexpected result. Olaf gave it to her flat, because there was no longer any incomplete truth that would help. The warden commandant attempted to process the human stock as an example. The host intervened. It walked through a full suppression line and a contact-range discharge, sustained catastrophic injury, disabled the warden commandant with a single non-lethal strike, and stood down 8 armed enforcers without killing any of them. It is now spending the seeded strength to keep itself alive. Non-lethal. VRY tasted the word, her styluses moved. It walked through weapons fire that would end a servitor frame, reached the one creature responsible, held the strength of a drawl in its hand, and chose to merely put him down. She turned her narrow head toward Elian. "Do you understand, host, that you have just made yourself the single most valuable being in this sector? A drawl strength heavy that reasons is a rumor the Reach would spend a fleet to confirm. A drawl strength heavy that reasons and shows restraint under maximum provocation, that does not merely survive but chooses mercy with the strength to choose otherwise, is not a weapon." Something moved in her cold plume, and Olaf realized with a slow horror that it was admiration. "It is a governing instrument. Do you know what the Dominion could hold with 100 of you? Not conquer, hold occupy without atrocity, suppress without slaughter, a caste that cannot be provoked into the very brutality that turns a subject population into a resistance." She was speaking faster now, the ledger closing line by line in her record-keeper's mind. "You have not shown me a failed weapon, host. You have shown me the most stable form of power the Dominion has ever failed to imagine. And you," she turned to Olaf, "are going to teach me how to grow it." Elian, against his strut, burned and barely conscious, laughed. It came out as barely a breath. "You want to make 100 of me," he said, to hold 100 worlds gently. I want to make 1,000 of you, VRY said, to hold the galaxy without having to burn it. Whatever you imagine the Dominion to be, host, I promise you the alternative that your red line would build in its place is worse. I am offering the Reach a way to rule that does not require monsters. You should, of all beings, approve. And the terrible thing, Olith tasted, was that some exhausted part of the human almost did. VRY set a retrieval order to the Reach that same hour. Olith tasted the courier plume go up the landing lane, and she named a ship, and the ship was 3 days out, and when it arrived it would take the host, the graftwright, the method, and as much of the harvest stock as could be crated, and it would carry all of it to a hall in the Reach where the thing VRY had imagined would begin to be built. 3 days. Olith had lived his whole life inside the comfortable machinery of the Dominion, and he had never once counted days against it, and now he counted. They moved Elian to the cradle hold to keep him alive, and Olith worked over him through the first night, not grafting now but the opposite, tending, the strange new work of trying to help a body he had overpowered survive its own rescue. Marta would not leave, so Olith let her stay, and the old human female sat in the V-Harrow dark and held the boy's hand and did not speak much, and her steady presence did more for the plume off him than anything in Olith's tear. Somewhere in the small hours, with Marta finally asleep against the cradle and Sivo gone to watch the landing lane, Elian surfaced enough to talk, and Olith said the thing he had been carrying since the drum. I can take it back. Elian's plume stirred. What? The graft, the strength. Olith kept his voice low. It has never been done, the reversal, because there has never been a reason. A frame that carried the draw line was never a thing anyone wished to return to what it was. But the seating is mine, and I know its architecture better than any creature alive, and I believe I could draw the line back out of you. It would be dangerous. It might kill you. Your body has reorganized itself around the strength and would have to reorganize again. But if it worked, you would be only human again. And a broken retrieval ship would arrive to find an ascendant asset that is no longer an asset, a spent boy with no beast in him, and there would be nothing to build 1,000 of. He paused. I built this thing on you. I would like, before I die, to have taken one of them back. Let me take it back, Elian. Let me undo it. The cradle hold was quiet. Marta breathed slow in her sleep. The harvest vats hummed their old mineral note 2 tiers below. No, Elian said. You do not have to decide now, when you are stronger. No, Olith. The human turned his ruined face toward the graftwright in the dark. I've been lying here thinking about it actually, before you even said it, thinking if I could give it back would I, because you're right, it's killing me, holding it. And I never asked for it, and every hour I have it your overseer wants it more. And the simplest thing in the whole galaxy would be to be a boy again and let her retrieval ship find nothing worth the fuel. He drew a slow breath. And then I thought about the drum. When Vosk went for the line. And I thought if I'd been just a boy in that drum, Olith, Marta would be dead. Denny would be dead. Half those people would be dead, and I'd have watched, and there'd have been nothing in my hands but hands. His plume steadied into the level, choosing thing Olith had learned to know. You gave me the strength to be a monster. And it turns out that's exactly the same strength it takes to stand in front of a monster and not move. You can't take one back without taking the other. So no, I'm keeping it. Not because I want it. Because there's a 9-year-old 2 tiers down who's alive right now because I have it. And I'm not going to be the reason the next Vosk finds him with my hands empty. Olith sat in the dark with his life certainty finished and buried, and something new and terrible standing in its grave. He had built 91 weapons. He had told himself 91 times that the strength dissolved the self, so that he would not have to know he was destroying people. And here was the 92nd dying of the very strength he'd forced on him, being offered his humanity back clean, and choosing, with his eyes open and his voice level, to keep the beast's power inside him and pay for it with his life. Because somewhere below them a child was asleep who might need him to hold a door. That was the thing his caste had never learned to measure, not the strength. the asterisk use of it. The whole science of the graft was built on the strength, on the harvesting and seeding and pointing of raw power, and it had never once thought to ask what a self would asterisk do with that power if the self did not drown. Because in 900 generations of grafting, no self ever had. It had taken a soft-skinned animal from the highest grade on the attrition index, a creature bred by a world that killed the weak, until only the ones who protected each other survived, to lie in his cradle and answer the question the whole caste had never thought to ask. And that, Olith realized all at once in the humming dark, was the flaw in Overseer Virai's ledger. He sat up straight. His plume must have spiked, because Elian stirred in answer. "What?" the human said. "She cannot build it," Olith said slowly. "The Overseer, her 1,000 of you, she cannot build it asterisk Elian, and she does not know it yet, and it is the only weapon we have." He turned his blind face toward the boy. "Listen. She wants to take the young from your red line, seat the draw line, and raise them in Dominion halls with Dominion loyalties, so that the will she cannot command by the plume simply never learns it is captive. Yes. She thinks the thing that makes you hold the door is in your asterisk stock, in the Deathworld blood, the self-strength she can select for and harvest." He was moving now, the cold, clean architecture of his caste mind turning against the thing it had been built to serve. "But it is not in your blood. It is in your asterisk Marta asterisk. It is in your Denny. The strength of the self that would not drown, you did not bring it out of the death world in your marrow. You built it, your whole life, out of every door you ever held for someone smaller. Take the young from the red line before they have a Marta, raise them in a Dominion hall with no one to protect and no world to belong to and nothing but the Reach's cause, and you will not get 100 of you. You will get 100 asterisk draws asterisk. You will get exactly the frightened thing in a cage that puts its fear into breaking, because that is what a self becomes when it has strength and no one to hold the door for." His voice had gone very quiet. "The restraint is not in the graft. It is not even in the human. It is in the asterisk bond asterisk. And the moment she harvests the human away from the bond to make her instrument, she destroys the only thing that made the instrument work. Her 1,000 governing soldiers would be 1,000 monsters. She would build, at ascendant expense, precisely the atrocity she is trying to avoid." Elian was silent, a long moment in the dark. "Then we have to make her understand that," he said, "before that ship comes, or she takes us both to the Reach and finds out the expensive way and burns a generation of kids learning it." "Yes. And she's a record keeper." Elian's plume had that tired, level focus again. "You don't make a record keeper understand something by telling her. You make her understand it by putting it in the ledger where she can't cross it out." He shifted against the cradle and winced and steadied. "So how do we do that, Olith? How do we write it in the ledger so hard she can't unsee it?" Olith Kesson, graftwright of record, sat in the dark of his own hall and did the thing his caste had built him to do, not for the Dominion, this time, for the first time in his life, but against it. He began, very carefully, to plan. Olith did not tell Elian the whole plan, because a plan has more chance of living if fewer creatures carry all of it, and because the part he meant to do himself was the part he did not want the human talking him out of. He began with the record. A graftwright of record held one authority even a record keeper could not simply override: the finding. When Olith seeded a line, the seeding produced a finding, filed in his own plume cipher into the caste ledger, and that finding stood as fact until another graftwright of equal standing overturned it, which in practice never happened, because there was no graftwright of equal standing to Olith Kesson in the Reach. He had spent 40 years filing findings that no one questioned. He was about to file the most important one of his life, and he was going to make certain it could not be crossed out. He worked through the second night in the specimen tier, among the harvest vats, and Tsivo worked beside him, and what they built together was not a lie. That was the thing Olith held on to. It was the truest document he had ever made. He pulled the seating records of all 91 prior carriers, every frame he had ever built, and he laid their outcomes end to end, and he wrote, in the cold, clean architecture of his cast, the finding the cast had never dared to write. 91 carriers, 91 dissolutions, and in the 92nd one hold. The variable was not the stock. 3 of his prior carriers had been human, taken from the red line in earlier years, the same grade 9 blood VRY wanted to harvest, and all 3 had dissolved, had drowned, had become the beast, exactly like the scale-cast conscripts and the servitor frames. Same stock, same graft, same result. The Deathworld blood had changed nothing. The variable in the 92nd was that Olith had, by pure administrative accident, seeded the line into a host who was still bonded, taken with his own people, held 2 tiers above the ones he loved, close enough to a Marta and a Denny that the self had something to hold the door asterisk for asterisk. The other 3 humans had come in alone, isolates, salvage crew singletons with no one of their own in the holding tier. They had drowned. This one had not. Olith wrote it plainly. The resistance is not heritable. It is not in the stock and cannot be selected for. The variable is the presence of a protective bond at the time of seeding. Remove the bond, take the young from their people, as the retrieval program proposes, and the carrier will not resist the beast. It will become the beast. The proposed harvest destroys the exact variable that produces the desired result. The program is not merely difficult. It is self-defeating. A generation of bonded strip-draw carriers would produce, at scale, precisely the atrocity the program exists to avoid. 91 monsters for every one soldier, and the one soldier only where a bond was left intact by error. He filed it under his own authority, graftwright of record, into the cast ledger, time-stamped and sealed, where a record-keeper of the auditing cast would find it the instant she queried the program, and where, once found, it could not be unfound, because a record-keeper's entire authority rested on the sanctity of the sealed finding. VRY could disagree with it. She could not make it not exist. And she could not take the program to the reach with a sealed finding from the graftwright of record, already standing in the ledger declaring it self-defeating, because the first thing the reach would do was read the ledger, and the first thing they would find was Olith's name on the disproof. She will be very angry, Tsivo said quietly, watching the finding seal. She is a record-keeper, Olith said. She does not have anger the way the brute has anger, she has the ledger, and I have just written a line in it she cannot reach. He was quiet a moment. That is the whole war, Tsivo, not the human in the drum, this. A record-keeper will spend a fleet on a ledger that closes. She will not spend a courier on one that does not. The moment she reads this finding and checks my 91 against it and sees that it holds, and it holds, Tsivo, I made certain it holds because it is true, she will do the coldest and most reasonable thing in the world. She will close the program to save the expense, and she will let the asset go because a single unrepeatable asset is not worth the cost of transport. He turned his blind face toward his student. We are not going to defeat her. We are going to make defeating us unprofitable. It is the only kind of victory the Dominion respects. But the ledger was the slow weapon, and Olith had built it for a record-keeper's patient mind, and he had reckoned on 3 days. He got 1:15. The retrieval ship came early. Tsivo tasted it first from the landing lane, the courier plume of a Reach vessel making its final approach a full 2 days ahead of schedule, and he came down through the tiers at a dead run. His young membrane flared wide, and found Olith still in the specimen tier with the seal of the finding barely cold. It's here, Tsivo got out. The retrieval ship. It's not 2 days out, graftwright, it's on final. The overseer must have flagged the asset at the highest priority. She must have. They moved a Reach vessel for this. It's coming down now, asterisk. His plume broke apart. And it's not a science hull. Tsivo, it's a asterisk seizure hull. Reach Marines. They don't send those to collect a cooperative asset. They send those to take a thing that might not want to be taken. Olith stood very still. He had reckoned on the record beating the ship. He had reckoned on VRY reading the finding, checking it against the 91, and doing the cold, reasonable thing before the transport ever arrived. He had built the whole plan around the patient machinery of a record-keeper's mind, meeting an unclosable ledger and choosing thrift. But a seizure hull already on final did not care about the ledger. A seizure hull would land, and Reach Marines would come off it, and they would take the host and the graftwright and the harvest stock by force, and file the paperwork after. And by the time some auditor in the Reach read Olith's sealed finding, Elian would already be in a hall on the far side of the Dominion being taken apart to find the method, and 60 humans would already be crated for the labor moons, and Denny would already be alone in a Dominion dark with no one to hold the door. The slow weapon had not been fast enough, which meant now there was only the fast one. "Where is the human?" Olith said. "The cradle hold." "But graftwright, he can barely stand. He spent everything in the drum." "Then he will have to spend what he does not have." Olith was already moving up through the tiers, faster than his old frame had moved in years. "Go to the holding drum. Get the humans on their feet, all of them, the old female, the child, all 60. Move them toward the beast hold gantry. It is the only route that does not pass the landing lane." He tasted Tsivo hesitate. "You loaded frames without thinking of them as people, Tsivo. You told me that was the mercy of it. Here is the cost of the mercy, come due at last. Go and treat them as people now and move them, and I will find you at the gantry." Tsivo went. And Olith Kesson, graftwright of record, who had spent 40 years building weapons for the Dominion and one sealed finding against it, went awake the last and best of the 92, and asked him to hold one more door. Elian heard the ship come down before Olith reached him. He was learning to hear things he had no right to hear. That was one of the changes he hadn't told anyone about, one of the ways the graft was rewriting him from the inside. It wasn't just the strength. It was the way sound arrived now, deep and structural, a warship's landing thrusters coming up through the rock of the garrison and into his back where he lay against the cradle, a great weight settling onto the world above him. He was awake and counting the seconds before the door of the cradle hold opened, and Olith's cold, clean scent came through it. And he already knew, from the size of the thing that had landed, that the quiet plan was over. "They came early," Elian said before Olith could speak. He was already sitting up. It cost him. He let it cost him and did it anyway. "That's a big ship. That's not a moving van." "It is a seizure hull," Olith said. "Reach Marines, they will take you and the stock by force. My finding is filed, but it is a slow weapon and the ship did not wait for it to work." The graftwright came to the cradle and put his gray hands on the human, reading the damage, and Elian felt him find how little was left. "You are burned through. You spent everything in the drum. I am about to ask you for a thing you do not have." "I figured." Elian got his feet under him. The hold tilted, steadied. The strength came up under the motion the way it always did, that second set of hands, patient, wanting to close, and for the first time since the graft he did not spend everything holding it back. Olith had told him the truth in the dark. The strength holding him together was also burning him down, so he stopped holding all of it in. He let a little of it out, let it into his legs, his spine, the torn places, and felt the wildness of it, the beast leaning into the open door. And he did not let the door swing wide, only cracked it, only took what he needed and no more. The pain eased, the hold steadied. He stood up straight for the first time in a day. "Careful," Olith said, tasting it. "I know," Elian breathed. The strength sang in him, closer to the surface than he'd ever let it, and he held it there at the crack at the exact edge. "That's the whole trick, isn't it? Not keeping it in, not letting it out. Holding it right at the line where I can still be the one deciding." He looked at the blind, gray creature who had made him this. "You spent your whole life afraid of what's on the other side of that door. I've been standing at it for 2 weeks. Turns out the door's the whole thing. You're only a monster if you stop standing in it." He rolled his shoulders and the burned skin pulled, and he let a breath of the strength ease that too. "Where are my people?" "Tsivo is moving them to the beast hold gantry. It is the only route that avoids the landing lane." Olaf paused. "The beast is on that route, the drawl. I did not have a better way." "Good," Elian said, and Olaf's plume flickered with surprise. "It's on our way. Then we're not leaving it in a cage." Tsivo had never in his life treated a human as a person, and he found, moving 60 of them through the underdecks of a garrison at speed, that it was the hardest work he had ever done, and that he was terrible at it. They did not move like stock. Stock went where it was driven. These went where the old female told them to go, and they carried the ones who could not walk, and they counted each other at every junction. Tsivo tasted them do it, tasted the plume of a group that would not leave a single one behind even to move faster, and they slowed to keep the child in the middle of them. The 9-year-old Denny, who had stopped crying and gone silent, and wide the way the young of any species went when the danger got too large to fit their fear. 2 more junctions, Tsivo told the old female Marta. "Then the gantry, the host will meet us there." "He's hurt," Marta said. It was not a question. She moved with a limp of her own and did not mention it. "He shouldn't be on his feet." "He is on his feet regardless." Tsivo hesitated, then said the thing that had been turning in him since the drum because he did not know when he would get to say it again. "Human, I loaded 11 frames before this, 11 of your kind and others. I told myself each time that the person was gone by the time I finished." His membrane tightened. "I do not think that anymore. I think I have done a terrible thing 11 times. I do not know what to do with that." Marta looked at him, the gray blind young alien who had helped make her boy into a weapon, and whatever she tasted or saw in him, she did not spend her mercy cheaply, and she did not withhold it either. "You carry it," she said. "That's what you do with it. You carry it and you don't do it again and you help the next one out the door. That's all any of us get to do about the bad we've done." She put a human hand briefly on his gray arm and Tsivo flinched and did not pull away. "You're helping us out the door right now. Start there." The garrison alarm changed pitch above them. The seizure Marines were moving, spreading through the upper tiers, and their heavy tread came down through the rock. Tsivo tasted the 60 humans hear it and press closer together and keep moving, and he took them through the last 2 junctions at the fastest pace the slowest of them could hold, and they came out onto the beast-hold gantry into the grudging daylight from the armored filter shafts, high above the drum where the drawl paced its cage. And Vosk was waiting for them there. The warden commandant had lost his drum, his commission, and his standing, and a garrison brute with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind, because he is no longer trying to win. He is only trying to make sure that if he goes down, the thing that unmade him goes down first. He had 4 enforcers with him, not the 8 from the drum, only 4, the ones loyal enough or stupid enough to follow a fallen commandant onto a gantry against an ascendant asset, and he had stationed them at the Beast-Hold's control station, where the suppression lattice was governed, and where a single command could either hold the cage drawl or free it. "The Overseer's Marines want the monster whole," Vosk said, as the humans spilled onto the far end of the gantry and stopped. His plume was the flat, ruined calm of a creature past caring. "They want it studied. They want 1,000 of it. I have decided they will not have that." He put one scaled hand on the lattice control. "I am going to free the beast into this gantry, and I am going to let it do what a beast does to a hold full of soft stock. And when the Marines arrive, they will find their precious asset covered in the blood of its own kind, and the graftwright's pretty finding will not matter, because there will be nothing left worth harvesting. If I cannot have my sermon, monster, I will have my last word." Tsivo, 60 humans, an old female, a 9-year-old child, at the far end of a gantry over a caged war beast, and a fallen brute with his hand on the cage. Vosk freed the drawl. The suppression lattice powered down with a shriek Tsivo felt in his teeth, and the beast came off the wall of the hold, and this time there was no test, no observation, no count of 30. Only a frightened animal loosed into a space full of the small, warm scent of prey, and it hit the base of the gantry and the whole structure rang, and it began to climb. The humans could not run. The gantry was a dead end. Behind them was the junction they'd come from, and the Marines were in the junction. Below them was the beast. Tsivo tasted the 60 plumes spike into pure animal terror, tasted the old female get herself in front of the child, tasted the whole group brace for a death there was no way to escape. And then he tasted the other thing come onto the gantry behind them, from the junction, moving through the Marines and not around them, and he knew that scent now better than his own. Elian arrived. He had come through the Marines. Tsivo would only understand later how, that Elian had reached the junction as the Reach Seizure Squad closed on it from the other side, and that a burned, spent human with a cracked door and a war beast's strength had gone through a squad of Dominion Marines, the way water goes through a fence, not over it, not against it, but between and past, taking their weapons and not their lives, folding a heavy repeater around a support strut here, setting a Marine down hard and gentle there, leaving the whole squad disarmed and winded and alive on the deck behind him, and arriving on the gantry with nothing in his hands and everything in his eyes. He took in the gantry in a single pass. The 60 humans braced against the dead end, the old female in front of the child, the drawl climbing, Vosk at the cage control with his ruined comm and his 4 enforcers. He did not go for Vosk. That was the thing Tsivo would carry. There was a fallen commandant right there, the author of all of it, one open hand away, and Elian went past him because Vosk was not the thing about to kill 60 people. The beast was. And Elian had learned in a drum that you do not answer a cause when an effect is already in the air. You catch the effect first and settle accounts after, and only if there is time. He went to the edge of the gantry, and he dropped off it, down into the hold, into the path of the climbing drawl. Tsivo rushed the rail in time to taste it, the human and the beast meeting for the second time, on the wall of the hold this time, the drawl coming up and the human coming down, and the same impossible arrangement as before. Not a fist, a catch. Elian hit the climbing beast and wrapped it. Tsivo could not have said how. The mechanics of it were beyond any frame he understood, and used his own falling weight and the cracked open strength to pull the drawl off the wall, and the two of them fell together the last of the way to the floor of the hold, and the sound of them landing was the sound of the whole garrison flinching. And then in the daylight coming grudging through the filter shafts, the human began again to talk the beast down. Tsivo could taste it from the gantry, the low, level choosing plume, the same one Elian had used before, aimed at the frightened enormous thing pinned under him. Easy, easy, I know, I've got you. Nobody's going to hurt you. Easy. And the drawl thrashed, and the human held bleeding strength he did not have into the holding, and slowly, slower than before, because the beast was more frightened than before, freed into terror and prey scent and noise. Slowly the fury plume began to thin. It was not fast, it was the opposite of fast. And Vosk, watching his last word refuse to happen, made his final move. He drew his replacement sidearm and aimed it not at Elian, who could fold it, but down into the hold at the asterisk beast asterisk, to kill the drawl and rob the human of the thing he was trying to save, one last spite before the end. Tsivo was closest. He would never be able to explain afterward what moved him. He was gray-cast, blind, soft-membraned, bred for the graftwright's careful stillness, and he had spent his whole short life doing what he was told at the elbow of terrible acts. But he had carried 11 frames, and an old human female had told him an hour ago that you helped the next one out the door, and there was a beast in a hold that a human was trying to save, and a brute about to kill it out of spite. Tsivo crossed the gantry and put himself between Vosk's sidearm and the hold. No, he said. It was the smallest word. It was the same word the human had given the scent caller, and the drum, and the whole certainty of the Dominion, and Tsivo had learned it from him, and he gave it now to a fallen commandant with his own soft gray body, which had no strength in it at all, only the choice. Vosk hissed and swung the weapon toward the graftwright instead, and that was the moment Olith came onto the gantry from the junction, tasting his student standing unarmed in front of a brute's gun, and Olaf, who had been careful and still for 40 years, was not careful now. He crossed the gantry at a speed no one had ever seen a graftwright move, and he reached Vosk, and he did the one violent thing of his entire long life. He closed his old gray hand over the sidearm and the scaled hand that held it, and he did not let it aim. They struggled. Vosk was 400 pounds of garrison brute, and Olaf was an old blind gray creature who had never struck a living thing, and it should have lasted no time at all. It lasted long *enough. Because in the hold below, the draw went quiet. Elian had held it through the whole of it, through the fall, through Tsivo's no asterisk, through Olaf and Vosk struggling on the gantry above, and at last the beast's fury plume thinned to nothing, and the enormous plated head came down, and it leaned into the human's open hands the way it had the first time, the circuit firing in the old wet dark of its brain. Kin. This one is kin. And Elian, on the floor of the hold, holding up the head of the most feared animal in 4 systems for the second time in 3 days, looked up through the daylight shafts at the gantry, at the brute and the graftwright locked together over a gun, and he made the decision that Tsivo would spend the rest of his life describing to graftwrights who did not believe him. He let the beast up. He rose, and he brought the calmed drawl up with him, the two of them standing together on the floor of the hold, the human's hand flat on the beast's flank, and the drawl, steadied, kin-bonded, following the low-level plume of the only living thing that had ever touched it without trying to kill it, turned its enormous head up toward the gantry and the scent of the brute who had caged it and starved it and freed it to die. "You wanted a monster," Elian said up to Vosk in his wrecked and level voice. "You spent all this trying to make me into one. And the whole time there was a real one in a cage under your feet, scared out of its mind, and you never once thought to ask what it wanted." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "It doesn't want to hurt anyone either. It just wants to go home. Turns out that's most monsters, Warden. Turns out it was never the monsters." Olaf wrenched the gun from Vosk's hand and folded it. A graftwright's grip was not a drawl's, but Olaf's old hands found the mechanism and ruined it. And the warden commandant, disarmed, spent, his last word taken from him, stood on the gantry breathing hard and looked down into the hold at the human standing calm beside the freed beast, and at his own 4 enforcers who had not moved to help him, and understood, finally and completely, that it was over, and that he had lost it not to a bigger monster, but to the one thing his whole life had never taught him to fear. Kindness with the strength to do otherwise. Overseer VRY came onto the gantry as the last of it settled, and she came alone, because her Marines were disarmed and winded on the deck of the junction behind her, laid out by an asset she had been told could barely stand, and a record keeper who finds her instrument has just walked through her own retrieval squad does not arrive with an escort. She arrives to recalculate. She stopped at the rail and looked down into the hold at the human standing calm beside a freed drawl, one soft hand flat on the flank of the beast. Her whole civilization existed to fear. And Olaf tasted her cold plume take the whole scene in and begin, immediately, to do arithmetic. "You have freed a drawl into a garrison," VRY said. "You have disabled a reach seizure squad. You have, I am given to understand, disabled the warden commandant twice." Her narrow head turned toward Olaf. "And you, graftwright of record, have filed a sealed finding into the cast ledger during the night, timestamped before my ship made planetfall. I have not read it. I was informed it exists the moment my hull queried the program. A sealed finding from the graftwright of record, filed against a live program at the highest authority in the discipline." Her plume had gone very flat, very careful. "I find that I am afraid to read it, Olaf Kesson. Tell me what is in it before I do." So Olaf told her. He told her plainly in the cold, clean architecture she would understand, the whole of it, the 91 dissolutions, the 3 prior humans of the same red-line stock who had drowned exactly like the rest, the single-held host and the accidental bond that held it, and the finding that fell out of the data with the weight of proven fact. The resistance was not heritable, could not be selected for, was not in the stock at all. It was in the bond. And her program, which proposed to take the young from their people and raise them stripped of every bond in a Dominion hall, did not fail to produce the instrument by accident. It destroyed the exact variable that produced it by design at the first step. She would not build 1,000 governing soldiers. She would build 1,000 of the beast in the hold, frightened strength with no one to hold the door for, and she would build them at ascendant expense, and they would be the atrocity at scale that the program had been conceived to avoid. VRY listened to all of it without moving. Then she queried the ledger from the little array at her wrist, and she read the sealed finding herself, and Olaf tasted her check it, tasted the record-keeper's mind run his 91 against his conclusion, looking for the flaw, the unsealed edge, the place where the graftwright of record had let feeling into the finding. There was no such place. Olaf had made certain it was the truest document of his life. The gantry was quiet for a long time. Below, the drawl breath slow against the human's hand. Above, the daylight came grudging through the filter shafts and laid a pale band across the record-keeper's narrow face. "It holds," VRY said at last. Her plume had changed. The great idea that had arrived in the beast hold and locked into place was being, Olaf tasted, carefully and completely dismantled, filed and closed. "I came to this garrison to confirm a rumor and carry home a method. And the graftwright of record has demonstrated, in a sealed finding I cannot overturn and cannot unknow, that the method does not exist. That what I saw in the beast hold was not a repeatable technique, but a single unrepeatable accident, a bond the seeding happened not to break. One cannot harvest an accident." She was silent a beat. "One can only fail to reproduce it, expensively, in front of the reach, which would end the career of whoever proposed it." "Yes," Olaf said. "You knew that." A cold thread of something that was almost respect moved through her plume. "You did not build me a wall, graftwright. You built me an exit. You gave me a finding that closes the program as a discovery. The method is self-defeating. A fleet was saved from a futile atrocity. The auditor who found it in time is owed a commendation rather than as a defeat. You made it cheaper for me to let this go than to pursue it, and you made letting it go look like wisdom." Her narrow head tilted. "That is a very human way to win a thing. I begin to see where the host learned it." "He did not learn it from me," Olaf said. "I learned it from him." VRY looked down into the hold one more time, at the human and the beast, and Olaf tasted her arrive at the last line of the ledger and write it. "The program is closed," she said, "as non-replicable per the sealed finding of the graftwright of record. The asset is released as strategically valueless to harvest, a single accident, unreproducible, not worth the cost of transport or the risk of the demonstration failing before the reach. The human stock taken from the salvage convoy is released with it. 60 units are not worth a second incident, and the record will show the garrison chose thrift." She was already turning, the decision made and filed. The record-keeper who had come for a method and would leave with a commendation and an unbroken career and never once admit, even to herself, that she had lost anything at all. The warden commandant will answer for freeing a drawl into a garrison and for the loss of the asset through his own spite. That at least closes cleanly. She paused at the mouth of the junction. "Graftwright. The Reach will want to know why its best graycast filed a finding that cost the Dominion its most promising program in a generation." "Tell them," Olaf said, "that the graftwright of record found the program to be built on a false certainty, and that a graftwright who files a false certainty is worth nothing to the Reach at all." He turned his blind face toward her. "That part is also true." VRY considered him a long moment. "It is the most expensive true thing I have ever been handed," she said. "I will carry it home carefully." And she went, and her Marines gathered themselves off the deck and went after her, and within the hour the seizure hull lifted off the landing lane and climbed out through the grudging daylight and was gone, and the garrison at Sarin Reach, which had briefly held the future of the Dominion in a beast hold, went quiet. They should have run for the Red Line the moment the seizure hull cleared atmosphere. Every instinct Olaf had left after 40 years of Dominion service said so. Take the reprieve, take the 60, take the human before the Reach changed its mind and go. Elian would not go without the beast. You heard her, Olaf said. They stood on the beast hold gantry, the 60 humans resting at last in the junction behind them, the drawl quiet in the hold below with the human scent still on it. The warden commandant is to answer for freeing a drawl into a garrison. When the Reach comes to collect that answer, they will render the beast down, because that is what one does with a loose drawl. You do not recage it, you end it. There is nothing to be done for it. It was never going to leave this rock alive human. It was a war beast in a cage before you ever arrived. It was a scared animal in a cage before I ever arrived, Elian said. And I've got its strength in my body keeping me alive right now, and I am not going to walk off this rock and leave the thing it came out of to be melted for parts. That's the same math your whole caste has been doing for 1,000 years, Olaf. Take the strong part, throw the rest away, tell yourself the rest was already gone. He looked down into the hold. I'm done doing that math. It's on our way to nothing and it costs me something to move it and I'm going to move it anyway. Help me or don't. Olaf stood in the grudging daylight and understood that this, too, was the thing he had built and could not take back, not the strength in the human's body, but the refusal in the human's spine, the flat, unhurried, expensive refusal to leave a living thing to the render, which was the same refusal that had held a door and a drum and would, Olaf suspected, hold every door this human ever stood in for the rest of his life. There is a beast transport in the lower bay, Olaf said. It was to carry the harvest stock to the Reach. It will hold a live drawl. It will not hold a calm one unless the calm one chooses to be carried. He paused. Which means it will not work unless you ride with it, and riding with it will cost you strength you do not have. Then it'll cost me strength I don't have. Elian was already moving toward the hold. Come on, I'm not getting less hurt standing here. Getting the drawl into the transport took the rest of the day, and it took all of them. Sivo governed the suppression lattice down by inches while Elian stood in the hold with his hand on the beast, murmuring the low-level plume, and Olaf read the animal's fear moment by moment and called the pace, and the 60 humans, who had every reason to be as far from the beast as the garrison allowed, instead formed a quiet line along the transport ramp, and did the thing humans apparently could not stop themselves from doing, which was to help. They steadied the ramp. They cleared the route. The old female, Marta, stood at the top of the ramp where the beast could take her scent alongside Elian's, a second calm human presence, and Olaf tasted the drawl's fury plume ease a fraction further every time it caught her. It should not have worked. A war beast did not walk up a ramp into a box for anyone. This one did, slowly, trembling, following the only 2 living things in 4 systems that had ever stood near it without a weapon, and when the transport's hold sealed around it, the drawl made a sound Olaf had never in 40 years of harvest heard a drawl make. A low, long, structural moan that was not rage and was not hunger. It's grieving, Elian said quietly, his hand flat on the transport's hull, reading the beast through it the way Olaf read everything. It thinks it's back in the cage. It doesn't know we're taking it home. He leaned his forehead against the hull, and Olaf tasted how much the day had cost him, the plume off the human thin and gray now, the strength that had been holding his burns together spent down to almost nothing by the long work of keeping a beast calm. I have to ride with it. It won't hold together in the dark alone. Neither will I, probably. We're kind of a matched set now, me and it. You are spending yourself to save an animal that will not remember you, Olaf said. I'll remember it, Elian said. That's enough. That's the whole thing, Olaf. You don't hold the door because they'll remember. You hold it because you were the one standing there. He pushed off the hull, swaying. Where's its home? The drawl. Where'd you take it from? Olith gave him the coordinates of the deep world where the harvest crews took the beasts. A drowned green place 3 jumps out that the Dominion charted only as a resource. And Elian nodded, and did not ask how they would get a stolen beast transport 3 jumps through Dominion space, because that was Olith's part, and the human had learned by now to trust that the old graftwright had a part. Olith's part was the requisition. A graftwright of record could move a great many things through Dominion space without question, because no one questioned a graftwright of record. That was the whole architecture of caste authority. The thing Olith had lived inside so long he had forgotten. It was a door that opened both ways. He had spent 40 years using it to move harvest stock toward the render. He used it now to move a beast toward its home and 60 humans toward the red line. And the requisition plume he filed was flawless, because he had filed 10,000 flawless ones, and no clerk in the Dominion would think to hold a transport authorized by Olith Kesson. He filed it, and then he stood in the specimen tier a last time, among the harvest vats, in the cold, clean mineral hum that had settled him for 40 years and would never settle him again. Tsivo found him there. "The transport is loading," the young graftwright said. "The humans are aboard, the beast is calm, the host is with it." He hesitated. "Graftwright, what happens to us, to you and me?" When the Reach reads that a graftwright of record requisitioned a transport that carried a live drawl and 60 released assets out of Dominion space. His plume was steady now, steadier than Olith had ever tasted it. The young one had crossed some line in the last 3 days and come out the other side harder and clearer. They will not call that thrift. They will call it what it is. They will call it desertion, Olith said, and they will be correct. Then we are not coming back to this hall. No. Olith turned his blind face toward the vats, toward the cold suspended strength of 100 dead beasts, the raw material of 91 drownings, the whole apparatus of a life he had spent very well by the Dominion's measure and thrown away entirely by his own. "I have been a graftwright of the Sail Dominion for 40 years, Tsivo. I have built 91 weapons and told myself 91 lies. I filed one true finding this week, and it cost me the Dominion, and it is the only work of my life I would care to be remembered for." He was quiet a moment. "I cannot take back the 91. That is the thing I want you to understand, before you follow me out this door and cannot follow anyone back through it. There is no reversal for what we did to them. They drowned and they are gone, and no sealed finding brings them up. All we get to do, all I have left to do, is not build the 92nd. And I did not build it. He built himself on my slab, out of the one thing I could not put in and could not take out." He turned toward the young one. "Come with me or stay, Tsivo, but decide it as yourself. That is the only lesson I have that was ever worth teaching. Decide it as yourself." Tsivo did not hesitate. "I carried 11, he said. "I am not staying in the hall where I carried them. I am going to help the next one out the door." His plume steadied. "The old female told me that is what you do with the badge you have done. You carry it and you do not do it again, and you help the next one out. I would like to start now, graftwright." "Then help me load the last of it," Olith said, "and let us leave this place before it remembers what we are." The deep world was 3 jumps out, and the transport made 2 of them before Olith understood that the human and the beast were dying together. He had thought it a figure of speech, a matched set. Elian had said half a joke. It was not a joke. Olith went down into the transport's hold on the second jump to read the drawl, and he found the human curled against the beast's flank in the dark, the 2 of them sharing warmth, and he tasted the terrible thing that the graft had done that no one in his caste had ever thought to look for. The seated strength in Elian was not a copy of the drawl's power. It was an asterisk piece of it, rendered out of a living beast and seeded into a living host, and the 2 of them, the source and the graft, were bound across the space between them by something Olith had no instrument to measure and no word to name, and the beast's long grief in the dark of the box was pulling the human down into it, and the human's spent, gray, holding on plume was all that was keeping the beast from tearing the transport apart. "You have to let it go soon," Olaf said, crouching by them in the dark. Both of you are failing. It grieves, and its grief pulls on the piece of it inside you, and you spend yourself answering, I can taste it, Elian. You are pouring what little you have left into keeping it calm, and it is calm only because you are pouring. When you run dry, you will both go over together. Then let's not run dry before the third jump. Elian's voice was barely there. His hand was flat on the beast's flank. He had not moved it in a day. It's close, right? It's home. It can smell it, I think. Or I can smell it for it. I don't know which of us is which anymore down here. A thin thread of the human's tired humor. That's a joke, Olaf, mostly a joke. Human. How long? One more jump. A day, perhaps a little more, to the surface. Then I've got a day. Elian shifted against the beast, and the drawl stirred and eased, the human's plume smoothing it even now, even spent. I've held longer with less. Go on up, Olaf. Send Marta down, would you? It likes her, and the plume flickered. I wouldn't mind her here. For the last of it, whichever way the last of it goes. Olaf went up and sent the old female down, and did the third jump himself at the transport's helm with Tsivo beside him, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing a graftwright's cold, clean, cast language had ever been built to say about a soft-skinned animal spending the last of itself in a dark hold to carry a monster home. The deep world came up green and drowned under the transport, and Olaf brought them down through wet gray daylight onto a shelf of stone above a valley of standing water, and the whole air of the place, when the ramp came down, was thick with a plume Olaf had smelled only in the harvest crew's samples and never at the source. The scent of a world full of drawl. They were out there. Olaf could taste them in the mist, dozens, scores. A whole living population of the animal his caste had taken one beast at a time for 1,000 years, moving through the drowned valley, and the plume of them was not the fury plume of the caged one. It was low and social and layered, the scent of a species at home in its own place, and threaded all through it was something Olaf had never once considered a drawl might make, because he had only ever met them in cages. It was calm. The species was calm. It was only the cages that had ever made them monsters. They brought the beast down the ramp, and it was the human who brought it, though the human could barely stand. Elian came down the ramp with one hand on the drawl's flank and Marta's shoulder under his other arm, and the beast came slow and trembling into the wet gray light of its own world, and it lifted its enormous plated head, and it took the plume of the valley into itself, and Olaf tasted the exact moment it understood where it was. The moan it made then was not the grief moan of the hold. It was the other thing. It was the sound Olaf would spend the rest of his life failing to describe to graftwrights who did not believe him. The sound a living creature makes when it has been in a cage so long it stopped believing in the outside, and the outside turns out to still be there. The drawl went down the shelf toward the water, slow at first, then faster, then not slow at all, and the valley answered it, scores of low social plumes turning toward the returning one, a whole species registering that one of its taken had come home, and it hit the standing water and threw up a sheet of it into the gray daylight and was gone into the mist toward its own, and the last Olaf tasted of it was the piece of it that lived in the human, stretched thin across the widening distance, and then. Elian gasped. Olaf turned in time to catch the human as his legs went, Marta already taking his weight, the two aliens and the old woman lowering the boy to the wet stone. And Olaf read him fast and afraid, expecting the worst, expecting the bound piece to tear loose as the beast went and take the human with it. And found instead the opposite. The strength in Elian had gone quiet. Not gone. Olaf tasted it still there, entire, the whole harvested weight of a drawl seated in the human's marrow. But the pull of it, the constant patient wanting to close that Elian had been holding against a door for 2 weeks, the leaning weight on the far side of every moment had eased. As if the piece, once it had done the thing the whole animal wanted most, once it had carried its beast home, had finally stopped straining toward violence and settled into the host like a held breath let out. The wanting's gone, Elian whispered. His eyes were open, wet, astonished. "Olaf, the door, it's not pushing anymore. It's just quiet, it's just strength now, it doesn't want anything." A thin, broken laugh. It got the one thing it wanted. It wanted to go home. It didn't want to break anything at all. It just wanted to go home, and nobody ever let it, and so all that strength, all that time, it had nowhere to go but into the walls. He was crying, Olaf realized, in the human way, the water running from his eyes. You take the strong part and you leave the wanting to go home part in a cage on a rock, and then you're surprised when the strong part comes out swinging. That was never the monster, Olaf. It was homesick. The whole time. It was just homesick. Olaf Kesson knelt on the wet stone of a drowned world. Among a species his caste had spent 1,000 years calling monsters, and understood that he had spent 40 years harvesting grief and calling it strength. Elian mended on the way to the red line, which surprised everyone but the humans. The strength, gone quiet, stopped burning him down. It did what Olaf had told him it could do all along and had never had the peace to do. It turned its enormous weight to the slow work of putting a wrecked body back together, and it was very good at it, better than any medicine in Olaf's tier. The suppression line burns closed. The point-blank wound the warden commandant's sidearm had torn in him sealed and knit. Within 4 days, the human who had walked through a reach seizure squad on the last of his life was sitting up in the transport's forward hold, thin and scarred and quiet, eating whatever the 60 could scrape together and letting the old female fuss at him. He was not the same. Olaf tasted that, and the humans knew it, and Elian himself did not pretend otherwise. "I can hear the jump drives before they spin," Elian said. One watched to Olaf in the forward hold while the others slept. "I can smell it when Denny has a bad dream 2 compartments over. I put my hand on the hull and I can feel the whole ship the way you feel a room." He turned his blunt human face toward the graftwright. "I'm never going to not have this. Am I even quiet? It's in me for good. I'm going to go home, carrying a war beast for the rest of my life." "Yes," Olaf said. There was no kindness in a lie, and the human had earned the truth. "You will carry it always. It is quiet now, and I believe it will stay quiet because it got the thing it wanted, and there is no cage in you for it to rage against. But it is entire and it is permanent, and you will be, for the rest of your life, a soft-skinned creature with the strength of the most feared animal in 4 systems living under your skin." He paused. "I offered once to take it back. The offer stands, Elian. It would be dangerous, more dangerous now than before, with the 2 of you settled into each other. But I am the graftwright who seeded it, and I could try. You could go home only human. No one on the red line need ever know what was done to you." Elian was quiet for a while. The transport hummed around them. Somewhere aft, a child breathed easy in a dream that had turned kind. "You keep offering to take it back," Elian said. "And I keep telling you no, and I don't think you understand yet why the answer's no. So let me say it the last way I know how." He leaned forward. "You built this to make me a weapon, and it made me one. I am one. I walk through your Marines. I could pull this ship apart with my hands right now. That's real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't." His plume was level, the choosing plume, the one Olaf had learned to know better than his own certainties. "But you don't get to decide what a weapon's for. That's the thing your whole caste never figured out. You forge the thing, and then it's out of your hands, and the only question left in the whole galaxy that matters is who's holding it and what they love. You gave the strength of a monster to a kid who loves an old woman and a 9-year-old and a crew of salvage rats from a world nobody else wanted. So that's what the monster's for now. It's for holding doors. It's for standing in front of the sorting block. It's for carrying scared animals home." He sat back. "Take that back. No, you made a mistake, Olaf. You made the exact mistake you were afraid of. You made a monster. You just made it out of the wrong person to make a monster out of. And I'm not going to let you unmake it, because there are people who are going to need this the next time somebody like your warden commandant comes to the red line looking for stock. And there's always a next time. You know that better than I do." Olaf sat in the humming dark with the offer he had carried since the cradle hold refused, finally and completely, and understood that it would never be accepted, and that the human was right to refuse it. That was the whole of his regret, arriving at last in its final shape. He had begged in his own careful way to take it back, not once but 3 times, across 3 worlds, because taking it back was the only absolution his caste had ever taught him to imagine. Unseat the line. Unmake the weapon. Return the creature to what it was before the graftwright's hands, and call the ledger closed. He had wanted, more than he had wanted anything in 40 years, to be able to undo the thing he had done. And the human would not let him, because the human had already turned the thing he had done into something that could not be undone, without undoing all the good it now protected. Olith had given a war beast's strength to a boy expecting an obedient monster, and had gotten instead a young man who used it for mercy. And that young man had grown so large in the using that there was no longer any way to take back the strength without taking back the mercy, and the mercy had become a thing the red line could not spare. He had regretted the graft from the moment the self would not quench. He would regret it, he understood now, in the opposite direction for the rest of his life. Not that he had made a monster, but that in trying to make a monster he had accidentally proven, past any sealed finding, the one thing his whole civilization could least afford to know, that the Deathworld's terrible children were terrible only to the things that came to cage them, and that everything the Dominion had ever done to stay ahead of humanity had been, from the first harvest to the last, 1,000 years of caging homesick animals, and being astonished when they came out swinging. "You were right," Olith said at last into the dark. "When I offered to take it back, you said I did not understand why the answer was no. I understand now." "Yeah," Elian's plume had gone gentle. "What is it then? Why's the answer no?" "Because I did not make a weapon," Olith said. "I revealed one. It was in you before I ever touched you, in the old female and the child and the whole soft, stubborn lot of you. I only put a strength beside it large enough that the rest of the galaxy would finally have to see it. And a thing that was only revealed cannot be taken back. It can only be known." He was quiet a moment. "I have spent my life afraid of the wrong thing. I told you that in the cradle hold, and I did not yet know how right I was. My caste was never afraid of the strength. We could cage the strength. We did, 1,000 years of it. We were afraid without ever letting ourselves say it of the door, of the thing that decides what strength is for. And your kind is the only kind we ever met that brings its own." They came to the red line on the 9th day. Olith did not take the transport into the human sphere. A Dominion hull, however requisitioned, would not have lasted an hour in the space around a grade 9 world, and the humans said as much, with a grim fondness for their own home's lethality that Olith was still learning to read. Instead they made the threshold, the charted edge where Dominion space thinned and the red line's own traffic began, and Elian raised a human salvage tug on a frequency the 60 knew, and within a day a battered human hull came out to the threshold to take its people home. The human hull that came for them was a scarred old thing, patched and repatched, bristling with the improvised defenses of a people who had grown up expecting the dark to come for them, and had stopped being frightened of it a long time ago. It matched the transport's drift, and a boarding tube crossed the gap, and the 60 began to go home. They did not go quickly. That was the thing that undid Olith, watching from the transport's ramp. They did not stampede for the tube the way stock stampedes for an open pen. They went in order, the strong carrying the weak, the whole knot of them counting each other one last time, and every single one of the 60 stopped before they crossed, and did a thing Olith had no gland to make and had to learn in that hour to read. They came to say goodbye to the 2 gray aliens who had helped them out the door. They did not all have words. Most did not. A young salvage hand gripped Sivo's arm the human way and did not let go for a long moment and said nothing at all, and the young graftwright stood and took it, his soft membrane flushed with something too large to name. A woman pressed something into Olith's gray hand, a worn metal token, a salvage crew charm, worth nothing, worth the world, and closed his fingers over it and moved on before he could speak. The 9-year-old Denny stopped in front of Olith and looked up at the blind gray face of one of the creatures who had, 2 weeks ago, been going to render him for parts, and did not understand any of what had happened well enough to hold a grudge or grant a pardon, and simply, gravely, taught the old alien the clapping game. Patted Olith's slow gray hands through the pattern once, twice, until Olith followed it, and then ran laughing for the tube. And Olith Kesson stood on the ramp of a stolen transport with a child's game in his hands and 40 years of certainty in ruins around him, and did not have, in the whole cold, clean language of his caste, one single word for what he felt. Marta was near the last. She stopped in front of Olith, and she looked at him with her steady, gray-haired human calm, and she did not thank him, because thanks was too small and the old woman knew it. "Could come," she said instead. "Both of you, the red line's hard. It's a killing kind of hard. It's a grade 9. You'd never once be comfortable and you'd never once be safe." A ghost of something crossed her face. "But we take in strays. It's about the only thing we're good at out here, taking in the ones the galaxy threw away. You threw yourselves away this week, the both of you, to get us home. There's a berth on that tug for 2 aliens who'd rather be strays with us than cast with them, if you want it." Olith had not let himself think past the threshold. A graftwright of record who deserted the Dominion had nowhere to go. That was simply true. The Reach did not forgive, and there was no other Reach. He had assumed, in the part of him that had stopped assuming much, that he and Sivo would take the empty transport out into the dark and go until it stopped, and that this would be the correct price for 91 drownings, and that he would not mind paying it. He had not once imagined that the door held both ways for him, too. "We are the ones who did this to your boy," Olith said, "to 3 of your kind before him. My caste has hunted your red line for 1,000 years. You know what we are." "I know exactly what you are," Marta said. "I watched you 2 weeks. You're the ones who did it, and you're the ones who couldn't stop yourselves from undoing it at the cost of everything you had. That's not nothing to us, gray man. That's about the only thing that isn't nothing." She glanced back at the tube, at Elian standing there waiting for her, thin and scarred and quiet and carrying a monster he'd turned into a shelter. "My boy holds doors. He didn't get that from nowhere. Come be a stray, Olith. Come find out what your hands can do when they're not building weapons. There's always another door out here that needs holding." And she crossed the tube. Sivo turned his blind young face toward Olith. He did not say anything. He did not need to. His plume said all of it. The young one who had carried 11 and helped 60 and wanted, more than his ruined caste future, to keep helping the next one out the door. "Graftwright," was all he said. "Do we go with them?" Olith Kesson stood on the ramp between the 2 dark ships, the Dominion behind him, 40 years and 91 drownings and a whole cold, clean architecture of certainty, and the red line ahead of him, a killing world and a battered tug and a berth for 2 strays offered by the exact people he had wronged. And he found that the decision, when it came, was not hard at all, and that this was itself the last lesson, the one Elian had been teaching him since the cradle hold without ever saying it plainly. You did not get to choose what you had built. You only got to choose from here what you would build next and whose door you would go and stand in. "Yes," Olith said, "we go with them." Elian was the last across. He waited at the mouth of the boarding tube while the 2 gray aliens gathered the little they had and left the rest, left the transport, left the harvest vats aboard it full of cold suspended strength that Olith would spend a long night deciding what to do with and would, in the end, send drifting into the red line's nearest star. 100 harvested griefs finally out of their cages. And when Olith and Sivo came to the tube at last, Elian was still there, holding it, the way he held everything. "Marta talked you into it," the human said. "It was not quite a question. The old female is persuasive. She's the most persuasive person I've ever met, and I've met a war beast." A thin, real smile, the first one Olith had ever tasted whole off him. "You're going to hate it out here, Olith. You know that. It's cold and it's hard and it's going to try to kill you about 6 ways before breakfast, and the people are stubborn and they don't let go of anything, and half of them won't trust a gray face for years." Elian's smile held. and you're going to be all right anyway. Because they don't take in strays because it's smart. They take in strays because that's the door, and out here everybody holds it. You'll fit better than you think. Olith stood at the threshold of the human hull, the token still in one gray hand, the child's clapping game still somewhere in the other, and he asked the human the last question he had, the one he had been carrying since the cradle hold, since the moment the self would not quench, and the whole certainty of his caste began to die. Elian, when it is done when you are old, if your killing world lets you get old, what will you have wanted this to have been? The strength, the thing I put in you, he needed to know. It was the closest a graftwright of the Dominion came to a prayer. I built it to be a weapon, you made it a shelter. When it is all behind you, which will you have wanted it to be? Elian thought about it. He did not answer quickly, he never did. The quiet was the whole of him. Neither, he said at last. I'm not going to want it to have been a weapon, and I'm not going to want it to have been a shelter. I'm going to want it to have been a choice. That's the only thing that was ever mine in the whole business, Olith, not the strength you gave me that I didn't ask for it, the choosing. Every door, every day, standing in it or letting it swing. That's the part that's mine. He put his scarred human hand on the old alien's gray shoulder, the human gesture, and this time Olith did not flinch and did not need to learn it. He had learned it. You spent 40 years thinking the scary thing about my kind was the strength. It was never the strength. You could cage the strength. The scary thing, the thing your whole dominion could never cage and never will, is that we get to choose what it's for. Every single one of us. Every single time. And you never know which way we'll choose until we're standing in the door. He squeezed the gray shoulder once. That's the thing you gave a boy from a grade 9 world, the strength of a monster to make you finally see. Come on, graftwright. Come home to a world that'll try to kill you. You've earned the door. Olith Kesson lived 19 more years, and he lived all of them on the red line, and the human had been right about every part of it. It was cold and it was hard, and it tried to kill him a great many more than 6 ways, and the people were stubborn and did not let go of anything, and some of them never did learn to trust a gray face. 1,000 years of harvest did not unhappen because 2 graftwrights crossed a boarding tube. Olith did not expect it to. He had drowned 91, and he carried them the way the old female had taught the young one to carry the 11, without setting them down, and without doing it again, and by helping the next one out the door. There was always a next one. That was the thing about a killing world. There was always another door. The token the woman had pressed into his hand at the threshold, the worn salvage crew charm worth nothing and worth the world. He kept on a cord at his throat for all 19 years, where a V-Harrow's sensing membrane could feel the small weight of it against every word he spoke. He never learned the woman's name. She had crossed the tube before he could ask, and by the time he thought to look for her, the red line had scattered its 60 back across a dozen hard stations, the way a killing world scattered everything to survive. But the charm stayed. It was the first thing anyone had ever given the graftwright of record that was not a commission, and he had spent 40 years not knowing there was a difference, and he spent the back half of his life learning it by the weight of a stranger's charm against his throat. When a red-line child died under his mending hands, and they did, because the world was hard and no hands were good enough to hold every door, he would go afterward to the cold place at the edge of the station and stand a while and feel the charm, and carry the small new grief up beside the 91, and not set any of them down. It was the only right his ruined caste had left him. It was enough. The humans had taught him that a grief you refused to set down was not a wound you failed to heal. It was a door you kept holding for the dead, so that no one who came after would be carried off while you were looking away. He never built another weapon. He had thought, crossing the tube, that he was leaving the graft behind entirely, and he was wrong about that too, because the red line was hard, and the hard broke people, and it turned out that the same hands that had spent 40 years seeding strength into bodies that could not survive it could also, with everything turned the other way, help a body survive what the red line did to it. He learned to mend instead of make. He was old to learn a new use for his hands, and he learned it anyway, in a battered clinic on a battered station at the edge of a world that killed its own children as a matter of course and produced, from the survivors, the only people who had ever offered him a birth. Tsivo learned it beside him and grew out of his soft translucence into a steadiness that Olith was proud of in a way his caste had no gland to make. And when Olith's own end came, a red-line winter, a failing chest, an ordinary death on an extraordinary world, it was Tsivo's steady gray hands that tended him, and a great many human ones, and a 9-year-old grown tall who still, sometimes, played a foolish clapping game with the dying alien's slow gray fingers to have something to do with the grief. Elian came at the end. He was old too by then, as the red line measured old, scarred and quiet and gray at the temples, and he still carried the war beast under his skin, quiet all those years, a monster turned so thoroughly into a shelter that 3 generations of a hard world had grown up in the lee of it without ever quite knowing what it was. He had held a great many doors. Olith had watched him do it for 19 years, and had never once seen the strength come up as a fist. It had lifted fallen beams off trapped miners. It had held a failing pressure hatch shut with a whole station's air behind it. It had stood, twice more, between the red line's people and things that came out of the dark to cage them, and both times the things that came had learned the lesson the warden commandant learned in a bright drum, and had not come back. There had been one door in the middle of those years that Olith watched and never forgot. A slaver hull had come to the edge of the red line the way they still sometimes did, testing whether the killing world's reputation was worth the cost of a raid, and it had put a boarding party onto an outer station where the salvage families kept their young. They had expected stock. They had expected a hard fight and a hard profit, the way the Dominion had reckoned humans for 1,000 years, a resource that struggled and lost and was carried off. And Elian had been on that station, old already, gray at the temples, and he had met the boarding party in a corridor no wider than the tube he had once carried 60 people across, and he had not killed them. That was the thing Olith had come to expect and had still, every time, found astonishing. Elian had taken their weapons, and folded the ones worth folding, and set the raiders down winded and whole and disarmed against the corridor walls, and he had crouched down among them, an old human with a war beast quiet under his skin, surrounded by the very thing his strength had been harvested to become, and he had told them, in the flat, unhurried voice that had never once in a lifetime risen, to go home, and to tell whoever sent them what a red-line world did with the ones it caught. The raiders had gone home, and whatever they had told the dark had listened, because the outer stations kept their young after that, and the slaver hulls thinned, and a killing world that had spent its whole history being reckoned as prey was, slowly, by the width of one old man's held doors, being reckoned as something else. He sat by the old alien's bed, and he took the gray hand the human way, and neither of them said very much, because the quiet had always been the whole of Elian, and Olith had long since learned to speak it. "I have been trying," Olith said near the end, "to decide what I would tell them, my old caste, if one of them ever came out here and asked me what I learned. What I would put in the finding." "Yeah," Elian's thumb moved once over the back of the gray hand. "What you come up with?" Olith was quiet a long time. The red-line winter moved against the clinic's walls, a killing cold held off by a hand's width of battered metal and the stubbornness of a people who would not let go. Somewhere down the corridor a child was laughing. There was always a child on the red line. That was the thing the harvest had never understood, that a world that killed its children as a matter of course made, of the ones who lived, the only creatures in the galaxy who would spend everything they had so that the next one did not have to. "I would tell them the truth," Olith said, "that I set out to make an obedient monster, and I was very good and I succeeded. I put the strength of the most feared animal in 4 systems into a soft young creature from a death world, exactly as I was paid to, and it worked. The graft took. The weapon was real. His blind gray face turned toward the human he could barely see and had never once needed to. And then I would have to tell them the part that finished me. That the weapon looked at me from my own slab, with a beast's strength in its marrow and a warden's fist waiting to point it. And it asked after an old woman it loved. And I have spent 19 years in the whole back half of my life out here on a world that hates me. And I still cannot decide whether that was the moment I lost everything I believed, or the only moment in 92 that I ever built something worth having built. Elian smiled, old and quiet, and did not answer, because it was not a question, and because he had known the answer since a dark cradle hold a lifetime ago, and had been letting the old alien arrive at it in his own time, the way you let a stubborn thing come to a door on its own. Olith Kesson closed his milk-blind eyes. He had regretted the graft from the moment the self would not quench, had begged across 3 worlds to take it back, to unseat the line, to undo the one thing his hands had done that would not stay undone. He did not regret it now. That was the last certainty he lost, and the only one he was glad to lose. He had reached out to build a thing that could not choose, and a soft-skinned animal from a killing world had taken the strength he gave it and chosen, and chosen, and chosen, every door, every day, for a lifetime, and made of a monster a roof over a hard world's children. He had been afraid of the strength his whole life. He should have been afraid of the choosing. He was not afraid of it anymore.